Welcome to this quiet journey through one of the most layered and carefully constructed worlds in the Fallout universe. Tonight, we are exploring the Commonwealth, the ruins of Boston, Massachusetts, and everything that survived within them. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from tonight. And if you enjoy these calm explorations of Fallout lore, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. The Commonwealth is not simply a backdrop. It is a place built from real memory, real geography, and real history. And the more closely it is examined, the more it reveals about what was lost and what, quietly, remained. The city of Boston was chosen as the setting for Fallout 4 with careful intention. The region's architecture, its street patterns, and its cultural identity were all drawn upon during development. The dense brick neighborhoods, the elevated highways, the narrow colonial streets that run beside modern glass buildings. One of Boston's most recognizable landmarks, the Freedom Trail, was incorporated directly into the Commonwealth's geography. The trail's red brick path, which winds through the real city past historic sites and old cemeteries, was mapped into the game and given new purpose. In the ruins of the Commonwealth, that same path leads somewhere entirely different. It serves as a guide through the wasteland, a thread of the old world woven into the new one, still underfoot, still pointing somewhere. The Commonwealth's map is a compressed but surprisingly faithful recreation of central Boston. Neighborhoods like Charlestown, Cambridge, and the financial district are all present in recognizable form, some under slightly altered names, others reduced to open ruins. The South End remains the South End in spirit, even beneath centuries of decay. Fenway Park, perhaps the most iconic structure in all of Boston, was transformed into Diamond City, a settlement built inside the stadium's concrete bowl, using its walls as fortification and its field as a marketplace. Those who know the real stadium would recognize its shape immediately. The curves are the same, the scale is the same. Only the purpose has changed. Diamond City's outer walls are constructed from the Green Monster, the famous left field wall of Fenway Park. The green paint, the height, the slight curve of the wall as it follows the original stadium's geometry. All of it matches the real structure closely enough that the reference is considered intentional by those who have studied both. The wall that once defined the boundary of a baseball field became the boundary of a city. It was built for one purpose and survived into another, which is perhaps the most Commonwealth thing that could be said about any structure in the wasteland. The settlers who first made their home inside that stadium did so roughly 130 years before the events of Fallout 4. Terminal entries within Diamond City describe the early decision to establish the settlement there. The stadium's concrete foundations were among the few pre-war structures in the area that remained fully intact. Its design, meant to contain tens of thousands of people, made it naturally defensible. Raiders could not easily breach walls built to manage crowds. What was designed for entertainment was repurposed for survival. The wasteland has a way of finding uses for things that were never meant to last. Boston was not destroyed by a single warhead. The Commonwealth's uneven landscape of ruin tells a more complicated story. Multiple smaller warheads struck the region, and their scattered impact sites produced a patchwork of destruction. Some neighborhoods were leveled completely. Others were left almost intact at street level, walls standing, windows gone, furniture still visible through open doorways. This fragmented pattern of devastation explains why structures like Fenway Park, the Old North Church, and portions of Cambridge survived when areas only blocks away became craters. The destruction was not thorough. It was random, and in that randomness, certain things were left standing simply because the bombs fell somewhere else. In the opening sequence of Fallout 4, the sole survivor's pre-war neighborhood is depicted in the hours before the bombs fell. The street is calm. Children are playing. Neighbors are moving through their morning routines. Beneath the surface of that calm, a detail was placed that most people never notice. In the background of a neighbor's home, a television broadcast can be heard, a warning of incoming missiles, already in progress. The sound is faint. It was designed to be nearly inaudible unless someone stands close to the fence and listens. Most people are moving. Most people are not listening. That detail, buried beneath the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning, suggests that the warning came and simply did not reach everyone in time. The pre-war sequence was built as a separate, sealed environment, distinct from the post-war Commonwealth that follows it. The textures used to construct Sanctuary Hills in those opening minutes were never reused anywhere else in the game. When the bombs fall and the world transitions, a different map is loaded entirely. The pre-war neighborhood and the post-war ruins are not the same place, rendered differently. They are two separate constructions, layered on top of each other in time, but not in space. The brief pause in the transition is the moment between them, the seam where one world ends and another begins. When the sole survivor returns to Sanctuary Hills 210 years later, the neighborhood is recognizable but altered in ways both large and small. Among the smallest of those changes is one that is easy to miss. The garden gnomes that stood in the yards during the pre-war sequence have moved. Each one is in a different position than it occupied before the war. Every gnome was manually repositioned in the post-war version of the map. No explanation is ever given for this. No character mentions it. The gnomes simply stand in new places, as if 210 years of silence gave them somewhere else to be. It is a quiet, unsettling detail, one that rewards only those who remember where the gnomes stood before. The Commonwealth contains more named skeleton scenes than any other region in the Fallout universe. Over 200 distinct arrangements were placed across the map, each one composed of a skeleton and a specific collection of surrounding objects that together suggest a story. A skeleton near a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. A skeleton facing a wall with a calendar still open to a specific month. A skeleton with a child's toy cradled against its ribs. Most of these scenes are encountered fewer than 30 times in a single journey through the wasteland. The rest remain in collapsed structures, in flooded basements, in places with nothing to mark them as worth finding. They were placed there anyway. The story was told anyway. Pre-war Boston was home to a remarkable concentration of research institutions and defense contractors. ArcJet Systems developed propulsion technology for nuclear missiles. Mass Fusion operated a major energy research facility near the center of the city. The CIT, which was the Commonwealth's version of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, conducted advanced research that would later form the intellectual foundation of the institute. Corvega produced its automobiles nearby. These institutions did not survive the war, but their knowledge did, stored in terminals, preserved in sealed rooms, buried beneath rubble. The institute was built on that inheritance. Everything it became was made possible by what the pre-war city left behind, sealed beneath the ruins, waiting to be found. What the Commonwealth kept beneath all that ruin and silence was the memory of a city that had always believed it could build something that would last. Beneath the ruins of the old world, something was built in secret. It was not built quickly. It was not built easily. The institute grew over many decades, far underground, hidden from the wasteland above. What it became was unlike anything else in the Commonwealth. Clean, controlled, and completely cut off from the surface. Its halls were bright and white, while the world above remained grey and broken. The people who lived inside it rarely thought about the wasteland anymore. Over time, the surface became something they read about rather than something they knew. This chapter moves beneath that surface to look at what was built there and why it was built the way it was. The Institute's underground facility is never given an exact depth in any record or conversation found within its walls, but the clues are there for those who look closely. The distance from the CIT ruins above to the lowest levels below suggests the facility sits somewhere between 150 and 200 feet underground. The only way in or out was a teleportation system, a method of travel that was chosen deliberately. Conventional doors and tunnels were seen as weak points. The building was sealed from the surface during its earliest days of construction, and it was never meant to be reopened. The founders of the Institute believed that any door could become a vulnerability, so they built a place with no doors at all, only a beam of light that carried people from one world to another. In the wasteland, true control often begins with removing every way out. Those sealed walls were built by hand. The lower levels of the Institute were constructed over many decades by the scientists who lived there, using old engineering manuals saved from the ruins of the CIT above. Early construction was done without power tools. Materials were carried down by hand, load by load, before the first elevators were ever installed. There were no machines to speed the work. There was only time and the people willing to spend it. The clean, white, sterile look that defines the Institute today took nearly 80 years to achieve. It did not begin that way. It began as bare concrete and dim lights, and people doing slow, hard work in a very small underground space. The beauty of control, it seems, is always built on a foundation of quiet, patient suffering. The Institute is divided into 4 departments: bioscience, robotics, synth retention, and advanced systems. Each one serves a clear purpose within the larger structure of the facility. Together, they give the institute its shape, its experiments, its machines, its residents, and its reach into the wasteland above. But there is a fifth group, one that appears only in terminal entries and is never spoken of by any resident within the facility. It is referred to simply as standard deviation. Its purpose was to track and study the results of experiments run by the other four departments. Its terminals are sealed behind the highest security clearance available inside the institute. No resident will discuss it. No record explains why it was kept so quiet. It remains one of the most overlooked details in the entire facility, a department designed to observe everything, yet seen by almost no one. In the wasteland, the most powerful rooms are often the ones with the fewest names on the door. The culture of secrecy inside the institute extended even to the smallest details of daily life. Scientists were not permitted to leave the facility. This rule was never hidden, but it was also reinforced in ways that most residents would never consciously notice. There are no coats in the institute's living quarters, no boots designed for outdoor use, no weather gear of any kind stored in any cabinet or closet in the residential wing. The wardrobes found in those rooms contain only lab coats and formal clothing, nothing designed for rain, cold, or open air. Every piece of outdoor clothing was removed from those spaces as a deliberate design choice. The absence of a coat, it turns out, says more about isolation than any posted rule ever could. It removes even the idea of leaving. Many of the scientists who lived inside the institute had never seen the surface at all. They were born underground, raised underground, and spent their entire lives underground. The wasteland was something that existed in reports, not in memory. Terminal entries from the bioscience department include writings from scientists who describe the sky, using only textbook descriptions and data sent back by synths on the surface. One entry, written by a scientist named Dr. Ao, describes trying to imagine the color of sunlight using only light spectrum data. The entry was not placed as part of any larger record or experiment log. It sits quietly on a terminal with no special purpose, written by someone who never once stood beneath an open sky and felt warmth on their face. In the wasteland, survival sometimes means giving up the very things that made survival feel worth wanting. The Gen 1 synths, the skeletal, fully robotic versions that many wasteland residents feared, were used as surface scouts long before the more advanced synth models were developed. Their patrol logs, stored on terminals in the robotics wing, contain detailed records of surface weather patterns, creature movement, and radar activity across the Commonwealth. Some of those logs include observations about Diamond City that were recorded before Diamond City even existed as a settlement. The Institute watched through synth eyes as survivors moved into Fenway Park and began building walls around themselves. It observed the city grow from a rough camp into something permanent. It never made contact. It never stepped in to help or harm. The wasteland changed and grew and struggled while the Institute watched quietly from below, through the eyes of machines that felt nothing about what they saw. The way Gen 1 synths move carries a history that most people would not expect. Their walking pattern was originally designed for a different type of machine entirely, a pre-war military robot that was planned for use in the Commonwealth, but was never completed or released. When that design was set aside, the movement was transferred to the Gen 1 synth instead. This is why the synth walks with a slightly stiff, military bearing that does not quite match its thin, skeletal frame. The walk was designed for a heavier, bulkier body. It was repurposed for a lighter one. The result is a machine that moves like a soldier wearing someone else's uniform, purposeful, slightly wrong, and built from pieces that were never originally meant to go together. The floors of the Institute carry their own quiet connection to the wider history of the wasteland. The white, reflective tile that lines nearly every corridor shares its basic design with the flooring found in vault facilities seen elsewhere in the wasteland. The tile size, the spacing between tiles, and the surface finish are all nearly identical once the color is removed and the two surfaces are compared directly. Whether this connection was a deliberate design choice or simply a practical one made under the pressure of limited resources is never confirmed in any record. But those who have examined both spaces note that the visual link is difficult to dismiss. The Institute and the vaults were designed separately, yet something in their foundations feels as though it came from the same place. That connection runs deeper than floors. Terminal entries in the Institute's Advanced Systems Wing contain records of a research agreement between CIT and Vault-Tec, signed in the year 2065, 12 years before the bombs fell. The agreement is described as covering long-term population behavior modeling. The specific nature of the research is never detailed in any surviving record. No resident of the Institute speaks about it directly. No explanation is ever given for why the two organizations work together or what they hope to learn. It remains the only documented evidence that CIT and Vault-Tec ever had a formal relationship. Whatever they were studying together, that knowledge was sealed away, along with everything else the Institute was not prepared to explain. Vault 111, the vault where the sole survivor was kept in cryogenic sleep for over 200 years, was not originally designed for that purpose. Early records from a Vault-Tec facility in the Commonwealth show that Vault 111 was first planned as a study on atmospheric filtration systems. The cryogenic experiment was added later, near the end of the vault's design phase, as the original research goals were quietly set aside. The original filtration equipment was never removed from the lower levels of the vault. It remains there still, packed in its original containers, never installed, never used, never explained to the residents who were eventually sealed inside. Vault 111 was designed to be one thing and quietly became another. It is a small reminder that even the most carefully controlled plans are changed by the people who make them. The cryogenic pods inside Vault 111 were designed to preserve residents for 6 months, not 210 years. The power system that kept those pods running was never built for that kind of long-term survival. It continued only because a secondary fusion core backup system had been installed without the knowledge of the Vault-Tec staff members who managed the vault above ground. When those staff members died, that backup system kept running on its own, silently, without instruction, without anyone left to maintain it or check on it. The sole survivor did not survive because the vault worked the way it was designed to work. The sole survivor survived because of a system that was never meant to be found, quietly doing its work in the dark for over 2 centuries, long after everyone who had known about it was gone. The Institute built a world it could control completely. And in doing so, it created a world where even its own scientists forgot what the sun looked like. The Commonwealth was never controlled by one group. It was pulled in 4 directions at once. The Brotherhood of Steel came from the sky. The railroad worked in the dark. The Minutemen tried to hold the edges together, and the Institute watched from below. Each one believed it had the right answer. Each one was also wrong about something important. The wasteland has a way of doing that, of taking a good idea and slowly filling it with contradictions until the idea and the damage it causes are impossible to separate. The Brotherhood of Steel's presence in the Commonwealth was never officially approved. Elder Maxon's mission aboard the Prydwen was classified as a recon and retrieval operation, not a permanent settlement. The Brotherhood's main leadership, based at the Citadel in Washington, D.C., never gave formal approval for a lasting presence in the Commonwealth. Every base built, every order given, every life taken by the Brotherhood in the Commonwealth was done outside the boundaries of what had been authorized. The whole operation was, in official terms, something between a long patrol and an unauthorized war. Yet, it continued, and no one at the Citadel ever called it back. The man leading that unauthorized operation was only 16 years old when he was made elder. Arthur Maxon became the youngest elder in Brotherhood of Steel history, and not everyone was comfortable with that. Terminal entries on the Prydwen's command deck show that several senior paladins raised objections at the time of his appointment. They questioned his age. They questioned his readiness. Maxon's response was to challenge the most vocal objector to a personal combat trial. The paladin declined the challenge. After that, no one raised the issue again. Maxon's authority was never formally disputed from that point forward. Whether that silence came from respect or from fear is something the terminal entries do not say. Maxon wore a long coat over his power armor, a piece of clothing that became as much a symbol as the Brotherhood's own insignia. The coat is listed in records simply as the battle coat. Its description reads, "Worn by Elder Maxon, smells like grease and authority." That description was placed there and never removed, even though it stands out as unusually casual compared to everything else written in the Commonwealth's records. It was not changed. It was not corrected. It simply remained, sitting quietly in the item records, a small informal note attached to one of the most powerful men in the wasteland. The Brotherhood's insignia, the gear, the sword, and the wings, was placed across the Commonwealth 847 times. It appears on painted walls, stamped metal, carved stone, and sewn fabric. It was placed on surfaces that most people would never look at closely, including the undersides of vertibird wing panels and the inner faces of power armor helmet visors. The symbol was designed to be everywhere. It was designed to be seen, even when no Brotherhood soldier was present. In the wasteland, a symbol placed in enough places eventually becomes the thing it represents. The Brotherhood did not need to be in every room if its mark already was. The Railroad took the opposite approach. Where the Brotherhood covered the Commonwealth in its symbol, the Railroad hid its marks so well that most people walk past them every day without knowing. The Railroad used a communication system known as the Chew Network. The red arrows painted on walls, the ones that lead to Railroad headquarters, were only one small part of that system. Terminal entries at Railroad headquarters describe 17 other types of markers used by agents in the field. Chalk symbols, specific arrangements of broken bottles, graffiti tag patterns with hidden meanings. None of these other marker types are ever shown or explained beyond those records. They were used throughout the Commonwealth by people whose survival depended on no one else being able to read what they had written. The Railroad's own history was something its members could not fully agree on. Different terminal entries within their headquarters give different founding dates. One entry places the organization's beginning at roughly 120 years before the present. Another entry, written by a different hand on a different terminal in the same room, places the founding at 80 years ago. A third entry, written by Desdemona, the Railroad's leader, says simply, "We don't actually know." This was not treated as an error to be corrected. It was left as it was, a quiet admission that even the people running the railroad were not sure where it came from. In the wasteland, some things survive long enough to outlast their own origins. The Minutemen were nearly gone before the sole survivor ever arrived in the Commonwealth. Preston Garvey is described as the last active Minuteman, the final member of an organization that had once protected settlements across the region. But terminal entries in the Museum of Freedom, where Garvey takes shelter during the attack on Concord, reveal that at least 9 other Minutemen were still alive at the time. They are never mentioned again in any record, any conversation, or any note found anywhere in the wasteland. What happened to them after Concord is never explained. They were there, and then they were not, and no one wrote down why. The collapse of the Minutemen traces back to a battle that the Commonwealth remembers but does not fully show. The Battle of Quincy, where the Minutemen were broken by a group of mercenaries called the Gunners, is referenced in conversations but never depicted directly. Quincy still exists as a location in the Commonwealth, held by Gunners. In the residential area of the town, a series of handwritten paper notes can be found, not typed records, but notes written by hand, that piece together the battle from the point of view of the civilians who survived it. Read in order, those notes take about 12 minutes to get through. No marker points toward them. No record suggests they are there. They exist only for those who go looking. The Commonwealth contains more handwritten paper notes than any other region in the wasteland's recorded history. 643 unique paper notes have been documented in the Commonwealth alone. Of those, 211 have no connection to any larger event or investigation. They were placed in the world simply to tell a story about the place where they were found. Several of those notes appear to be responses to other notes that no longer exist, fragments of conversations where only one side of the exchange survived. The other half was lost or removed, or simply never placed. What remains is a half-spoken record of lives that ended before anyone could finish writing about them. Not all the missing pieces were lost by accident. References exist in the Commonwealth's records to a faction called the Commonwealth Provisional Authority, a group connected to the pre-war government that was apparently planned to take up residence in the State House in Boston. Voice recordings from named members of this group can still be found in stored data files. The faction itself never appeared. It was removed before it could take shape in the world. The State House remains in the Commonwealth, largely empty, full of sealed rooms and locked doors that have no clear explanation. Something was meant to be there. It was taken out, but the space it was meant to fill was never closed up behind it. The Institute may have had a reason to want that space to stay empty. Several terminal entries in the Institute's records refer to something called surface stabilization operations. The language used in those entries describes the active disruption of organized settlements on the surface as a goal pursued by the Institute in the early post-war years. The Institute was not simply hiding underground while the wasteland developed on its own. According to those records, it was working to make sure that no large organized community ever formed above it. This detail appears in no conversation, no speech, and no confrontation within the Institute's halls. It sits in the records, written in the calm, clinical language of people who had decided the surface was something to be managed rather than shared. The factions of the Commonwealth each believed they were building something worth preserving, and each, in different ways, was also tearing something else apart. The Commonwealth was not empty between the factions. In the spaces they left behind, people built things. Small things at first, a wall here, a roof there, a place to sleep that was safer than the open wasteland. Over time, those small things became settlements. Some of those settlements grew into cities. Some stayed small and quiet. Some hid terrible secrets behind clean walls and friendly faces. The wasteland has always been full of places that look like one thing and turn out to be another. This chapter moves through those places, one by one, and looks at what was built, what was hidden, and what was left buried beneath the surface. Diamond City was the largest settlement in the Commonwealth. It was built inside the walls of an old baseball stadium, and it was run for years by a mayor named McDonough. Most people in Diamond City trusted their mayor. They had no reason not to, but the evidence that something was wrong with McDonough was there long before anyone said it out loud. His office contained a hidden safe behind a painting on the wall. Inside that safe was a holotape labeled McDonough. Personal. The recording on that holotape features McDonough speaking to himself in a way that sounds slightly off, too flat, too even, too controlled for normal speech. Most people who found the safe assumed it was connected to something else entirely and never listened to it before the truth came out. The clue was placed there to be found. Most people just were not looking for it yet. When McDonough was finally revealed to be a synth, Diamond City did not fall apart. No one left. No emergency meeting was called. Business at the market continued the next morning, the same as it had the morning before. The responses from Diamond City residents ranged from quiet denial to complete indifference. Vadim Bobrov, who ran the dugout inn, had one line recorded for this moment that most people never heard. He said he always thought McDonough had been a little too organized for a mayor. That line was placed in the records and can only be heard under a very specific set of conditions that most people never meet. It was recorded and left there anyway. In the wasteland, the truth often arrives too late to change anything, and people have learned to keep moving regardless. Diamond City also had a school, one of the very few functioning schools found anywhere in the wasteland. The classrooms sat near the city entrance and was run by a teacher. The terminals inside contained lesson plans, including one on pre-war American history. That lesson described the resource wars, the series of conflicts that helped lead to the end of the old world, as a necessary response to global instability. That is the language of old government materials, of documents written to make destructive things sound reasonable. The lesson was still being taught 210 years after the bombs fell. In a classroom full of children who had never seen the world, those materials were written to defend. Some things survive longer than the reasons they were created. Good Neighbor was built as a direct answer to Diamond City. When Diamond City removed its ghoul residents following an incident of violence, the people who were forced out needed somewhere to go. The settlement that became Good Neighbor was founded by those people, ghouls and the humans who left with them. Its location in the old Scully Square neighborhood of pre-war Boston was not chosen by accident. Scully Square had been known before the war as a place that operated by its own rules, outside the cleaner and more controlled parts of the city. Good Neighbor was built to be that kind of place again, a settlement where the wasteland's outcasts could exist without being tested for purity or told to leave. The man who ran Good Neighbor, John Hancock, had made a very deliberate choice about who he wanted to be. Hancock ghoulified himself on purpose. He consumed a mixture of experimental chems that he knew could trigger the process. At a time when most ghoulification in the wasteland happened by accident through radiation exposure. His personal terminal records describe his reasoning as a desire to commit fully to the kind of person he was already becoming. The exact chems he used are listed in those records. The mixture produces no effect if anyone else attempts to recreate it. It was a one-time decision made by one person in one moment, recorded and left in his terminal like a quiet confession. In the wasteland, some people choose their own transformation rather than wait for the wasteland to do it for them. Covenant looked nothing like the wasteland. It was clean. Its walls were painted. Its residents smiled. The gardens were kept. It was the kind of place that made people want to stop and stay. Every person living in Covenant was part of a group dedicated to testing travelers for synth contamination. The test they used was called the SAFE test, a psychological evaluation given to everyone who wanted to enter. The notes of the pre-war psychologist who designed the test were stored in a hidden facility connected to the settlement. Those notes revealed that the test was put together in 3 days as a temporary measure. It was never properly validated. It was never replaced. The settlement's entire system of control was built on a test that its own creator had never finished. Yet it kept running, and people kept being judged by it, and no one on the outside ever knew. Vault-81 was designed to test cures for diseases by exposing its residents to those diseases without telling them. The Vault's original overseer refused to allow the experiment to begin and sealed the laboratory where the pathogens were stored. Because of that refusal, Vault-81's residents lived healthy lives, largely unaware of what had been planned for them. The sealed lab still exists beneath the vault. It still contains live samples of every disease the experiment was meant to test. One of those diseases, listed in the lab's records as mole rat disease, can be passed to anyone who enters the lab and is not careful. It reduces the body's maximum health permanently. There is only one known cure available anywhere in the Commonwealth. The vault was designed to cause harm, and even sealed, it still can. The Fizz Top Grill in Nuka World was built as a high-end restaurant before the war, and its kitchen was stocked accordingly. Every food item in that kitchen, every bottle, every can, every container, was given a unique pre-war label design not found anywhere else in the wasteland. Those labels were all created by one person. That person's initials were embedded in small text on the back of a Nuka-Cola bottle sitting on the restaurant's top shelf. The bottle has no use. It cannot be consumed in any meaningful way. It sits on the shelf with a tiny signature hidden on its back, placed there by someone who put enough care into a single kitchen in a ruined theme park to leave their mark on it. In the wasteland, pride in craftsmanship survives in the strangest places. Far Harbor was built on a real place. The island's geography was designed by hand, and several of its locations were based directly on real spots on Mount Desert Island in Maine. A research visit was made to that island, and photographs taken during that visit were used as direct reference for the fog-covered coastline and rocky terrain. One overlooked location on the island, with no connection to any larger event, contains a bench facing out over the water. The view from that bench matches a photograph taken during that research visit. The bench was placed there to face that specific view and nothing else. It serves no purpose beyond sitting quietly in a landscape that was built to look like somewhere real. Far Harbor's main settlement was also built on something real and functional, a working fishing dock. The settlement's economy was based on fishing, and the dock showed it. Equipment was present. Boats were present. The work was visible in the environment, not just described in conversation. Most settlements in the Commonwealth have no visible way of feeding themselves beyond crops that residents tend in small patches. Far Harbor had an economy that existed before anyone arrived and continued regardless of outside involvement. It was one of the few places in the wasteland that looked self-sufficient because it actually was. Sanctuary Hills, the neighborhood where the sole survivor lived before the war, holds one of the most overlooked details in the entire Commonwealth. The original garden layouts of the pre-war houses are still intact beneath the overgrowth that covers everything. The geometric garden beds, the stone walkway borders, the carefully placed lawn edges, all of it is still there under 210 years of weeds and debris. It was all built and then covered over completely. The pre-war version of Sanctuary Hills was not erased. It was buried. It remains beneath the ruins, whole and untouched, invisible to anyone who does not already know to look for it. Every settlement in the Commonwealth built itself on top of something that came before, and most of them never looked down to see what they were standing on. The Commonwealth did not always look the way it does now. Before the bombs fell, Boston was a living city. It had offices and factories and roads full of cars. It had schools and shops and radio stations. It had people who went to work in the morning and came home at night and never thought about what it would look like if it all ended. The pre-war world left behind more records than most people realize. Those records are still there, sitting in old terminals and on dusty shelves, waiting quietly in the ruins. This chapter looks at that world, what it built, what it planned, and how it ended. Arc Jet Systems was one of the largest defense companies in pre-war Boston. It was responsible for building the propulsion technology used in nuclear missiles. The Arc Jet facility still stands in the Commonwealth, and inside its main office, a work order is still pinned to a bulletin board. That work order is dated October 23rd, 2077, the day the Great War began. The test chamber inside the building was still being used that morning. The work was not finished. The order was never completed. It remains on the board exactly where it was left, a small piece of paper marking the last normal day the old world ever had. Mass Fusion, another major company in pre-war Boston, left behind a different kind of record. Terminal entries in its downtown headquarters show what the final hours looked like from inside a corporate office. At 9:42 in the morning on October 23rd, the company's chief executive sent a message telling all staff to report to their emergency stations. At 11:15 that same morning, a second message was sent with 2 words: disregard previous. Go home. The bombs fell at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The last message from the executive was sent at 1:47 p.m. It contains only a single period, nothing else. The silence after that period is the loudest thing in the entire building. The pre-war radio network in the Commonwealth had a Boston affiliate station connected to Galaxy News Radio, the same network that broadcast across the Capitol Wasteland in Fallout 3. The tower for that station still stands near the Charlestown neighborhood. A terminal at the base of the tower holds the final broadcast log. The emergency alert that was sent out that day was cut off in the middle of a sentence. The transcript ends with the word residence and then a blank line. The person reading that alert never finished what they were saying. The broadcast simply stopped mid-word and was never resumed. Fort Strong, a military base on the coast of the Commonwealth, was in the middle of a weapons test when the alert came through. The base's records show that a new version of the mini-nuke, a small nuclear device designed with a shaped charge that could direct its force, was being evaluated on the morning of October 23rd. The test was stopped when the emergency signal arrived. The shaped mini-nuke variants are still in the base's armory, sealed behind a heavy door that requires a keycard. The keycard is on a skeleton in the base commander's quarters. Most people who move through Fort Strong never find the armory. The weapons inside have been waiting behind that door for over 200 years. The Commonwealth had at least 11 active military bases in the pre-war period. This number comes from classified records found in a government building near Diamond City. Of those 11, only 4 can be found as named locations anywhere in the Commonwealth today. The other 7 are mentioned in documents, but have no visible presence on the ground. Those who have studied the terrain closely have found flat, cleared areas in the landscape that match the size and shape of military facilities, areas where the ground was prepared for construction that either never happened or left nothing behind. 7 bases referenced and then lost somewhere beneath the wasteland. The T-60 power armor, the heavy combat suit worn by Brotherhood of Steel soldiers throughout the Commonwealth, was built almost entirely in this region. The Charlestown Navy Yard, which sits near Bunker Hill, was one of only 3 production sites for the T-60 in the entire pre-war United States. Records in the Navy Yard's offices list the final output numbers: 1,847 complete suits shipped in the last year before the war. The production line inside the yard is still partially standing, frozen at the exact point where the work stopped. The suits that were never finished remain on the line, incomplete, exactly as they were left. The Corvega assembly plant in Lexington was doing the same kind of frozen work. The factory was producing its final car model, the Corvega Atomic FIF-8, when the bombs fell. The factory floor still holds cars at every stage of being built. One car near the end of the line is missing only its driver's side door. That door is sitting on a parts cart about 3 feet away from the car. It was never installed. The factory's records show that 23,000 atomic VF-8 units were scheduled to be delivered that week. Several buyers had already paid. The cars never left. The door never went on. Everything stopped exactly where it was. Pre-war Boston had hundreds of different kinds of shops and businesses. Records found across the Commonwealth's ruins have identified over 180 distinct types of stores: grocery chains, appliance shops, clothing stores, food stands, and specialty retailers. One storefront near the financial district still has a paper advertisement in its window offering a sale on a Braxo cleaner. The price listed is 39 caps. That is the same currency unit used across the wasteland today. The pre-war economy and the post-war economy used the same word for money, even though everything else about the world had changed completely. Pre-war Nuka-Cola cost 25 cents per bottle in the vending machines that were placed throughout the city. In the wasteland today, a bottle of Nuka-Cola is worth between 10 and 20 caps, depending on who is selling it. The value dropped even though the supply is limited and no new bottles will ever be made. The reason is simple. The number of people who want Nuka-Cola fell even faster than the number of bottles. There are fewer people in the Commonwealth now than there were bottles in just one pre-war neighborhood. The price reflects that. The math is built into every merchant's trading price across the entire region. Pre-war Boston had a population of around 650,000 people. The Commonwealth today holds somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 survivors, based on careful counts of every known settlement and group in the region. That is a drop of more than 98%. The Institute, hidden underground, keeps its own population count in residential records. That count lists exactly 1,247 residents, including synths. By that number, the Institute is the single largest organized community in the entire Commonwealth. More people live below the surface than in any city above it. Vault 111 was designed to hold 1,000 residents who would be kept in cryogenic sleep, a state of preserved, frozen survival, and then released to help rebuild the Commonwealth after the war. That was the plan, as written in Vault-Tec's own documents. The vault was built for 1,000 people. Only 412 were processed before the doors were sealed. The other 588 spaces were never filled. Outside the sealed entrance to the vault, a cluster of human remains can be found on the ground. These were people who came to the vault after the doors had already closed. They were turned away. They died at the entrance, within sight of the shelter that was built to save them. The pre-war world did not end all at once. It ended in 23 seconds of fire, and then it was simply gone, leaving everything it had built still standing, waiting for someone to explain what it had all been for. The wasteland did not stay empty after the bombs fell. The radiation that swept through the air and the water and the soil did not simply destroy things. It changed them. It reached into living creatures and rewrote them, slowly, over generations, until what came out the other side looked almost nothing like what went in. Some of those changes were small. Some were enormous. A few of the creatures that now walk the Commonwealth were not made by radiation alone. They were made on purpose, by people who thought they could control what they were creating. This chapter looks at those creatures, where they came from, and what they became. Deathclaws were not a natural mutation. They were created by the United States government, working alongside a company called Vault-Tec, as part of a program to develop a biological weapon that could replace human soldiers on the battlefield. The animal used as the base for this program was the Jackson's chameleon, a small, calm lizard that causes no harm to anything. It was exposed to the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, and subjected to targeted changes at the genetic level. What came out of that process was the Deathclaw. This origin is confirmed in records found across multiple locations in the wasteland, making it one of the most well-documented facts in the Commonwealth's history. The most dangerous creature in the wasteland was engineered from one of the most harmless ones. Deathclaws in the Commonwealth build nests. They arrange bones and broken objects into circular shapes and return to those nests after a fight if they are not killed. This behavior was not seen in Deathclaws encountered in other parts of the wasteland during earlier periods. It was added to the Commonwealth's Deathclaw population, specifically to make them feel less like weapons and more like animals. The nests sometimes contain eggs. Disturbing those eggs produces the same reaction as a direct attack. The creature that was designed as a pure weapon has developed parental instincts. It protects its young the same way any animal does, with everything it has. The Mirelurk queen, the largest of the Mirelurk creatures found in the Commonwealth, produces a sound before laying eggs that sits just below the level most people can clearly hear. The call lasts about 8 seconds. It was recorded using processed alligator sounds and then lowered in the audio mix so that it falls beneath the threshold of normal hearing. The decision to place it at that level was made because the sound was meant to be felt rather than heard, something the body registers before the ears do. The Queen announces herself in a frequency that bypasses the conscious mind entirely. Those who have stood near one and felt uneasy without knowing why may have been responding to exactly that. The Mirelurk found in the Commonwealth is not the same creature as the Mirelurk found in the capital wasteland around Washington, D.C. The Commonwealth version is descended from the Atlantic horseshoe crab. The capital wasteland version came from a different base species entirely. This difference is recorded in Institute research notes that compare Mirelurk types across the eastern seaboard at the genetic level. The two creatures look similar and behave similarly, but they are not the same animal. The Institute knew this. The research was completed and stored in their records. It was never shared with anyone on the surface. The super mutants found in the Commonwealth are different from those found anywhere else in the wasteland for a specific reason. They were not made from humans. They were made from failed Gen 1 synths, early robotic models that did not perform as intended, that were exposed to the FEV in the Institute's bioscience department and then released onto the surface. In Fallout 1 and 2, super mutants were created from humans by a figure called the Master, who sought to build an army. Commonwealth super mutants have no such purpose. They cannot reproduce. They were not made to build anything. The Institute's own records refer to them as disposal subjects, things that were used up and discarded. The Institute kept detailed records of every failed experiment it released onto the surface. Those records, stored in the Bioscience Department's archive, contain entries for 2,847 individual subjects across a period of 40 years. Each subject is listed by batch number rather than by name. The outcome of each release is recorded in one of three ways: unrecovered, terminated by surface agents, or lost. The word dead does not appear anywhere in the archive. The Institute wrote about the end of living things the way someone might write about missing equipment. The language was chosen to keep a distance between the action and its meaning. Feral ghouls, ghouls who have lost the ability to think or communicate, sometimes perform actions that seem to belong to a life they no longer remember. Ghouls found in kitchens have been observed reaching toward countertops and moving their hands in slow stirring patterns before returning to their normal behavior. Ghouls in offices have been seen moving their fingers as though typing at desks that have nothing on them. These actions appear during the moments when the ghoul is not reacting to anything around it. Whether the movements are deliberate echoes of a past life, or simply errors in the creature's damaged behavior patterns, has never been confirmed. The wasteland keeps the memory even when the mind that held it is gone. What separates a feral ghoul from one that can still think and speak has never been fully explained. Different records suggest different causes: too much radiation, too much time alone, psychological damage, or something in the body that simply breaks down unevenly from person to person. One terminal in the Institute's bioscience wing puts forward a different idea, that the deciding factor is not physical at all. According to that record, ghouls who stay in regular contact with other thinking beings do not go feral. Ghouls who are left alone consistently do. The author of the record noted that this finding was outside the Institute's area of interest and was not followed up on. Isolation, it seems, can end a mind just as thoroughly as radiation can end a body. Glowing ones are ghouls that have absorbed so much radiation that their bodies produce it rather than simply carrying it. In the Commonwealth, they also produce a pulse of radiation that heals other ghouls nearby. This behavior was not documented in earlier parts of the wasteland. It means that in any group of ghouls that includes a glowing one, the others are being kept alive by the one that has absorbed the most damage. Some researchers have suggested that this is why certain ghoul groups survive in areas where conditions should be too harsh even for them, because one irradiated body at the center of the group is sustaining the rest. The most damaged creature in the group becomes the thing that keeps the others going. The fog crawler, found on the island of Far Harbor, is a large crustacean creature that lives in the thick coastal fog that covers the island. Unlike nearly every other creature in the Commonwealth, the fog crawler has no documented origin. Records from deathclaws, mirelurks, and rad scorpions all trace back to a known base animal. The fog crawler does not. A terminal entry on Far Harbor states that the creature appeared on the island roughly 30 years before the present, long after the Great War. Where it came from and what it mutated from is not recorded anywhere. It exists in the wasteland's records without a beginning, a creature that arrived fully formed and was never explained. The angler, another creature found on Far Harbor, uses a glowing lure to draw in prey, a behavior seen in deep-sea fish, not in creatures that live near freshwater coasts. The lure moves on its own, separate from the rest of the body, bobbing and flashing in a slow rhythm. Audio records extracted from the area reveal that the lure also produces a sound, 4 notes repeating on a loop, that was designed to sit just below the level of normal awareness at any distance where combat might begin. The sound and the light work together. The creature draws things toward it, using methods that operate beneath the threshold of what the mind consciously registers. In the wasteland, the most dangerous traps are the ones that feel like something else entirely. The Commonwealth's creatures were not accidents. They were answers to a world that had been redesigned by radiation, and each of them, in its own way, had found a way to survive it. The Commonwealth is full of sound. Most of it goes unnoticed. The wind moves through broken walls and produces tones that shift depending on the size of the gaps. Rain falls on different surfaces and generates different rhythms. A radio plays in a ruined kitchen with no one left to hear it. Beneath all of that is a layer of sound that was placed with great care. Sounds that were never meant to be identified, only felt. This chapter moves through those sounds, from the smallest click of a Pip-Boy's Geiger counter to the breathing of a dog walking beside you through the ruins. The Geiger counter built into the Pip-Boy does not click at random. The pattern it follows is based on a real mathematical model, a modified version of what is known as a Poisson distribution, which is the same kind of pattern that a real radiation detector produces in a low radiation environment. The audio used for this effect was recorded from an actual Geiger counter, then slowed down and adjusted in pitch. The result is a sound that feels correct to anyone who has heard a real one, even if they could not explain why. The click is not decorative. It was built to pass as real, and it does. The Institute's ambient sound, the low, steady hum that fills every corridor and room in the facility, was set to play at a frequency of 40 Hz. That frequency sits at the very bottom of the range that human hearing can detect. Research into how sound affects the mind and body has found that frequencies near 40 Hz tend to produce mild alertness and a subtle sense of unease. The hum was placed at that frequency deliberately to make the Institute feel clean but not comfortable. The effect is strongest in the residential wing, where the hum sits underneath the sounds of people going about normal daily routines. The wrongness is quiet. It does not announce itself. Dunwich Borers, a quarry site in the Commonwealth, with a long history of strange events and references to old horror writing, carries an ambient sound layer that goes even further down. Some of the frequencies present in that location fall below 20 Hz, below the range of normal human hearing entirely. Sounds at that level cannot be consciously detected by the ear. But they can produce a physical response, a vague feeling that something is present, a sense of unease that has no clear source. Whether this was placed deliberately as part of the location's design or arrived as a side effect of the audio tools used is not confirmed in any record. The effect is there regardless of its origin. Every major interior space in the Commonwealth was given its own individual ambient audio track, not the standard outdoor sounds shared across open areas, but a unique loop built specifically for that one location. 847 such tracks have been documented in the Commonwealth's audio records. Of those, 203 belong to interior spaces that have no named residents and no connection to any larger event. These are rooms that most people walk through once and never return to. Each one was given its own sound environment anyway, designed and recorded regardless of whether anyone would ever stop moving long enough to hear it. Care was placed in rooms that were built to be forgotten. Diamond City Radio carries exactly 24 songs. All of them were recorded before the war, during a period running from the 1930s through the 1950s. They were selected from a much larger collection after a review of hundreds of recordings, with attention paid to how each song would sound coming from a damaged speaker, and whether the words would fit comfortably against the background of a ruined world. 3 songs were removed from the final selection because their lyrics, heard against that background, produced a tone that felt wrong for the station's purpose. Those 3 songs were never named in any public record. The playlist that remained was shaped not just by what sounded good, but by what did not cause harm. The static that plays between songs on Diamond City Radio was recorded from a real radio. A working tube radio built in the 1940s was found. Its antenna was deliberately damaged, and the static it produced was recorded. That recording became the static used in the Commonwealth. The choice was made because real tube radio static contains layers of harmonic sound that digital recreations do not produce. People who have grown up hearing old radios respond to that static differently than they respond to synthesized versions, even if they cannot identify why. The static between songs was given as much attention as the songs themselves. The sound of rain in the Commonwealth was recorded in New England. The audio team traveled to the Boston area and recorded a real thunderstorm. The reason given for the trip was that rain recorded in different regions sounds different. The density of trees, the composition of the ground, and the specific patterns of how water moves through the air, at a given latitude, all affect the acoustic character of rainfall. Rain recorded in one place does not sound the same as rain recorded somewhere else, even when the difference is subtle. The Wasteland's rain sounds like Boston because it was recorded in Boston during a real storm by people who believed that small differences in sound are worth the effort to get right. Damaged buildings in the Commonwealth do not all produce the same sounds when wind passes through them. The tones generated by a broken structure depend on the specific shape and size of its openings. A large hole produces a lower, broader sound. A small crack produces a higher, thinner one. The system that generates these wind sounds was built to calculate each tone based on the actual geometry of each building's damage, rather than selecting from a set of pre-recorded options. No two buildings sound exactly the same. Most people experience this as a general impression that the wind in the wasteland sounds realistic. The reason it sounds realistic is that it is, in a technical sense, actually behaving the way wind does. Gunfire in the Commonwealth produces 3 separate layers of sound for every shot. The mechanical sound of the weapon firing, the sound of the projectile moving through the air, and an echo calculated in real time based on the shape of the surrounding space. The same gun fired in an open field, in a concrete room, and in a forested area produces 3 different sets of sounds, because the echo layer is generated fresh each time based on what is around it. This system was first developed for use in an earlier part of the wasteland and was expanded significantly for the Commonwealth. The number of individually calculated echoes that pass through the region during a single hour of active conflict runs into the thousands. The junk jet, a weapon found in the Commonwealth that fires whatever small objects happen to be loaded into it, was not given a unique sound in its early design. It used borrowed audio from a weapon concept that was never completed. The final sound was created by loading a real metal pipe with screws, bolts, and bottle caps, the same objects the weapon fires, and recording the sound of compressed air pushing them through it. That recording was then adjusted in pitch and layered with a mechanical sound representing the weapon's recoil. The audio for the weapon was built from the same materials the weapon uses. The sound and the object are made of the same things. Each companion who travels through the Commonwealth has a breathing pattern that was recorded separately from everything else they say or do. Those breathing tracks play quietly during movement and were designed to give each companion a sense of physical presence beyond their words and actions. Dogmeat's breathing was assembled from recordings of 6 different dogs of similar type, mixed together into a single track that does not match any one of them exactly. Those who have studied the audio closely have noted that Dogmeat's breathing rate decreases gradually over the course of a long walk, as though the animal is genuinely settling into the rhythm of the journey. The sound was designed to calm down over time. In the wasteland, even the breathing of a dog was designed to make things feel a little quieter. The Commonwealth is not a silent place. It's a place full of sounds that were designed to be felt rather than heard, and the people who made it understood that the difference between the two is everything. The Commonwealth is full of people who carry more history than they show. Some of them talk about it in pieces over long hours of walking through the wasteland. Others keep it almost entirely to themselves. The companions who travel alongside the sole survivor are not simple characters. Each one arrived in the story with a past that stretches back further than most people realize. And the details of those pasts are scattered across the Commonwealth in terminals, in graves, in small engravings on rifles, and in the behavior of a robot who spent 200 years talking to garden gnomes. This chapter moves through those people, one at a time, and looks at what they carried with them. Nick Valentine was not originally meant to stay. In early versions of the Commonwealth story, Nick existed only to help with a single investigation. His part in things was meant to end there. The decision to keep him as a full companion came after it became clear that people who encountered him during that investigation were spending more time with him than with the companions who had been designed from the start to travel with the sole survivor. His warmth, his calm, his way of speaking about the wasteland as someone who had seen too much of it. These things connected with people in a way that was not planned. Thousands of lines of dialogue were written and recorded for him after that decision was made. None of it would exist if his original story had simply ended the way it was supposed to. The memories Nick carries do not belong to him. They belong to a man who shared his name. A police officer from before the war, whose mind was copied without his knowledge and used as the foundation for Nick's synthetic personality. That original Nick Valentine was engaged to a woman named Jenny Henderson. She was killed before the bombs fell, and he never recovered from it. The records of his life, scattered across old terminals and holotapes in the Commonwealth, allow those who search carefully enough to piece together what happened to him. Jenny Henderson's name appears on a gravestone in a cemetery near Diamond City. The grave has no marker pointing toward it. It was placed there for those who were already looking. Codsworth, the Mr. Handy robot who maintained the sole survivor's home before the war, was built knowing the family's names. Over 1,000 different name pronunciations were recorded so that Codsworth could address his household correctly, regardless of what the sole survivor was called. Those recordings were compiled from lists of popular names spanning several decades. Names that did not fit naturally into spoken sentences were left out. The list that remained was broad enough to cover most people who would ever stand in that pre-war kitchen and hear their names spoken by a floating robot who had been waiting for them since the day the world ended. Codsworth waited for 210 years. During that time, he kept cooking. He kept cleaning. He kept maintaining the house while every other structure on the street slowly fell apart around it. The house is noticeably better preserved than its neighbours when the sole survivor first sees it. That difference is Codsworth's work, visible in the environment without anyone pointing at it. His dialogue, spoken quietly over the course of many hours of conversation, reveals that he eventually began talking to the garden gnomes in the yard. They were the only things that did not leave. In the wasteland, even a robot finds ways to keep going when the silence gets too long. Piper Wright runs a newspaper called Public Occurrences. That name was taken from the first newspaper ever printed in America. Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, published in Boston in 1690. The layout of Piper's paper and the design of its masthead were based directly on images of that original publication. The typography and column format match. The reference was built into the design of the paper itself, visible to anyone who looks at it closely enough to notice. Piper did not just name her paper after something old and meaningful. The paper was designed to look like it. Deacon does not have a real history. He has several, and none of them match. Different conversations across the Commonwealth give him different ages, different explanations for why he wears disguises, and different accounts of what his life looked like before he joined the railroad. None of these stories can be made to fit together. A single entry in the railroad's own records, written by Desdemona, states plainly that the organization does not know Deacon's real name, does not know his age, and does not know how long he has been working with them. The entry ends with a suggestion that Deacon may not know either. In the wasteland, some people build so many false versions of themselves that the original becomes impossible to find. Strong, the super mutant, is looking for something called the milk of human kindness. He found the phrase in a damaged copy of a play called Macbeth, sitting in a ruined library somewhere in the Commonwealth. He interpreted it as a literal substance. He believes that consuming it will make him powerful in a way that fighting has not. His companion story never resolves this. By the time he reaches the highest level of trust with the sole survivor, his conclusion is that the milk of human kindness is something weak humans carry that somehow makes them strong. He does not understand what that means. The answer he arrives at satisfies the condition required to complete his story, but it explains nothing. In the wasteland, not every search ends with the thing that was being searched for. Robert Joseph Macready travelled a long road to reach the Commonwealth. He was last seen much earlier in the wasteland's history, as a child who had been elected mayor of a settlement called Little Lamplight, carved into the caves beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C. He aged out of that settlement at 16, as everyone eventually did, and made his way into the world beyond it. The sniper rifle he carries in the Commonwealth has his initials cut into it, R.J.M., the same letters that identified him as a child years before. The connection between who he was and who he became is not announced in any conversation. It is written on his gun, waiting for those who already know where to look. Kate's path to recovery runs through a vault that was designed to guarantee failure. Vault 95 was built by Vault-Tec as an experiment in addiction recovery. Its residents were all people trying to get clean. They were given a controlled, substance-free environment and allowed to settle into it. After 5 years, drugs were placed inside the vault without warning. Every resident relapsed. The vault tore itself apart. The treatment machine that Kate uses to end her addiction to Psycho, a combat drug found throughout the wasteland, is built from that same vault's technology. The tool that saves her was designed as part of a system that was built to watch people fail. She was cured using a machine that was never meant to cure anyone. Curie spent 200 years alone in a sealed laboratory beneath Vault 81. The vault had been designed to test experimental cures for diseases by exposing its residents to pathogens without their knowledge. But the overseer who was supposed to run the experiment refused, and the lab was sealed before the testing began. Curie was left inside with the work she had been assigned, and she completed it long before anyone ever came to find her. Her companion story involves moving her mind into a synth body, the same kind of transfer used to create the Gen 3 synths she will later stand beside. Her original body, the Miss Nanny robot she inhabited for 2 centuries, remains in the laboratory after the transfer. It is still there. It does not move or speak. It simply remains in the place where she spent all that time, waiting for something that had already left. The companion system in the Commonwealth tracks the behavior of the sole survivor, even when no companion is present to witness it. A companion who has been sent to wait at a settlement continues to be affected by actions taken far away from them. Those who act in ways a companion would support will find, upon returning, that the relationship has quietly grown stronger in their absence. This mechanic was not written down in any official record of the Commonwealth systems. It was found by those who looked closely at how the numbers worked and noticed that they were not staying still. In the wasteland, the people who matter to you are paying attention, even when you cannot see them. The people of the Commonwealth carry their histories quietly, and the ones who matter most are often the ones who say the least about where they came from. The Commonwealth does not operate by chance. Beneath everything that happens on the surface, the weather, the trade, the patrols, the quiet daily lives of settlement residents, there are systems running without pause, tracking variables that most people will never know exist. The world keeps its own records. It follows its own rules. It simulates things that no one is watching just as carefully as it simulates the things that are happening directly in front of you. This chapter moves through those hidden rules, one by one, and looks at the machinery that keeps the wasteland running. The weather in the Commonwealth follows a pattern. It does not simply shift from one state to the next at random. Each type of weather, clear skies, cloud cover, rain, fog, radioactive storm, follows a chain of probability that depends on what the weather was before it, what time of day it is, and what part of the Commonwealth the observer is standing in. Clear days are much more likely to follow cloudy ones than rainy ones. Radioactive storms rarely appear at the beginning of a period of activity. The system was designed to behave the way real weather behaves. Not identically, but with enough of the same underlying logic that the Commonwealth's climate feels like it belongs to an actual place, rather than a randomly generated backdrop. Named residents of the Commonwealth operate on schedules that run to 15-minute intervals across a full 24-hour cycle. Merchants open their stalls at set times and close them at set times. People eat at predictable hours. They move between specific locations along fixed routes. These routines continue regardless of whether anyone is nearby to observe them. Those who have found ways to watch settlements from a distance without being seen have confirmed that residents continue eating, sleeping, and going about their days, even when no one is present to witness any of it. The Commonwealth simulates a functioning society at all times. The society does not pause when no one is looking. The economy of the Commonwealth operates in isolated pockets. Every 48 hours of internal time, each merchant's stock and available currency resets to a base amount with a small variation added. This reset happens on a fixed internal clock that runs independently of anything the sole survivor does. Caps spent with one merchant do not reduce the caps available at another. Each trading post, each market stall, each travelling vendor draws from its own separate pool. The wasteland's economy was not designed to behave like a connected system where money flows from one place to another. It was designed as a collection of independent bubbles, each one sealed off from the rest. The supply lines that connect settlements to each other run as a live process on the Commonwealth's map. The people who walk those routes, called provisioners, physically travel from one settlement to another in real time. They navigate around dangerous areas. They stop to fight if something attacks them. The time it takes a provisioner to complete a route reflects the actual distance between the settlements they are connecting. A provisioner assigned to a distant settlement takes longer to arrive than one travelling a short distance. If a provisioner is killed on the road, the supply link they maintained is severed until someone new is assigned to walk it. The wasteland's supply chain depends on individual people making individual journeys, and it breaks the same way a real one would. Raider groups in the Commonwealth send out patrols that move away from their home base on regular schedules. Those patrols travel up to 300 units from the base before turning back. If a base is cleared of its occupants, but the patrol parties are still out when that happens, those patrols will return later to find their base empty. They will walk back in through the gates. They will resume their normal routines, eating, resting, standing at their posts, as though the base is still operational. A cleared location can become inhabited again through this process, not because anyone moved in, but because the last survivors of the original group came home to a place that no longer had anyone else in it. The Commonwealth tracks what the sole survivor has done toward each faction separately, using a hidden score that accumulates over time. There is no visible indicator for this score. It builds quietly in the background through accumulated actions. When it crosses certain thresholds, specific responses are triggered. More patrols in the area, dedicated groups sent out to deal with the threat, changes in how affiliated residents speak about what has been happening. Most people who experience these responses attribute them to specific decisions made during the Commonwealth's larger conflicts. They were caused, instead, by dozens of smaller actions that were being counted without anyone being told they were being counted. The Institute has been tracking the sole survivor since the moment they emerged from Vault 111. Records in the Institute's Advanced Systems Department show that synths operating on the surface were reporting observations back to the facility through a passive monitoring process. The sole survivor is referred to in those records as Surface Asset Alpha. That designation was in place before any formal contact was made. The Institute knew what the sole survivor was doing before the relationship between them was ever acknowledged. The watch had been happening quietly, through the eyes of machines no one knew were looking, for a significant period before either side ever spoke directly to the other. The railroad maintains its own internal monitoring system for the people who work within it. A hidden value tracks the stress level of each railroad agent based on how long they have been active and how much exposure they have had to operations that could attract Institute attention. Agents whose stress values rise too high are quietly cycled out and replaced. This practice is described in railroad records as a precaution against compromise. Deacon's stress value is among the lowest of any active agent, despite his unknown history and his unusually long, apparent connection to the organization. Whether this reflects recent involvement or exceptional stability is not recorded. The number simply sits there, lower than it probably should be, without explanation. Every named resident of the Commonwealth carries invisible flags that record what has happened around them and adjust their responses accordingly. A resident who was nearby when something significant occurred will speak about it differently than one who only heard about it later. Information passes between residents through a network of ambient conversations, and what a resident knows depends partly on where they were when events unfolded. Those who move quickly through the Commonwealth, traveling directly from one location to the next, will miss conversations that are only triggered by being physically present in a specific place at a specific time. Between 15 and 20% of all recorded speech in the Commonwealth is never heard by most people, because it requires presence at a moment that passes without them. Each settlement in the Commonwealth tracks its own well-being through a happiness value that is calculated from many separate inputs: food supply, clean water, beds, defensive structures, lighting, available trade, and the ratio of resources to residents all contribute to the number. The least known input is the frequency of visits from the solely survivor. Settlements that go without a visit for 7 or more days of internal time begin to lose happiness gradually, as though the community feels the absence of the person who helped build it. This effect was never included in any written guide to managing settlements. It operates quietly, reducing a number that most people do not know they are supposed to maintain. The system that reduces settlement happiness over time was originally intended to go further. In an earlier version of the settlement mechanics, neglect was meant to eventually cause a settlement to fail entirely. Residents would leave, resources would stop functioning, and the location would return to an empty state. That version was built into the system's code and then turned off before the Commonwealth was open to the public. The reason given was that people wanted to feel like what they had built would last. The choice was made to let things stay rather than to let them go. In the wasteland, permanence was chosen over realism, because some things matter more than accuracy. The Commonwealth runs on rules that most of its inhabitants, real and digital, will never see, and the world keeps moving whether anyone is watching or not. The objects of the Commonwealth outlasted the people who owned them. They sit in broken kitchens and collapsed offices and locked rooms that no one has entered in decades. Some of them are ordinary things: bottles, books, cans, toys. Some of them are weapons built from real designs that existed before the war. All of them carry something in them, a record of the hands that made them or the lives that used them, even when those records are too small for most people to notice. This chapter moves through those objects, from the largest weapons in the wasteland to the smallest label on the back of a bottle, and looks at what they still carry. The Fat Man is a portable launcher designed to fire miniature nuclear devices called mini-nukes. It exists in the Commonwealth as one of the most extreme weapons available to anyone moving through the wasteland. It is also based on a real weapon. The M28 Davy Crockett was a nuclear recoilless rifle built by the United States Army in the late 1950s. It was the smallest nuclear weapon ever put into active military use. The Fat Man's design, its proportions, and its basic mechanical concept were taken from that real device. The real Davy Crockett had a range of several kilometers. The Commonwealth version is more limited. An attachment is available that extends its range. That attachment is called the baby legs. It was named and placed in the records without further comment. The 10mm pistol has been carried by people across the wasteland since the earliest years of the post-war period. Its design changed significantly when it arrived in the Commonwealth. In earlier regions of the wasteland, the pistol was built on a frame that resembled the H&K USP, a real handgun known for its reliability. In the Commonwealth, the design was shifted to resemble the Sig Sauer P226, a different real firearm with a boxier, more angular profile. An even more different design had been planned before that, a fully original shape with no connection to any real weapon. That version was set aside after testing showed that people could not immediately recognize it as a pistol at a glance. The familiar shape was chosen because recognition matters more than originality when someone needs to know what they are looking at. The pipe weapons carried by raiders throughout the Commonwealth were designed to look exactly like what they are. Improvised firearms built from plumbing parts and scavenged hardware. The pipe pistol uses real pipe fitting shapes, and its trigger mechanism was based on a real type of improvised firearm that uses a simple sliding action to fire. Records from the design process show that actual documentation on improvised weapon construction was studied to make sure the pipe weapons looked as though they could function the way they appear to function. They are less reliable than proper manufactured weapons. They're also the only weapons in the Commonwealth that look like they were built by someone who had access to a hardware store and nothing else. The junk items found throughout the Commonwealth break down into the same raw materials that the real objects they represent are actually made from. A typewriter yields gears, screws, and steel because a typewriter is primarily made of those things. A telephone yields copper and steel for the same reason. The material values assigned to each object were based on what that object is genuinely composed of in the real world. The one exception that stands apart from the rest is the teddy bear. A teddy bear yields cloth. Most modern stuffed animals are filled with synthetic material, not fabric stuffing. The teddy bears of pre-war Boston, apparently, were made the old way. That small detail makes them the only junk item in the Commonwealth whose breakdown result is historically specific rather than simply accurate. Teddy bears appear in nearly half of all the skeleton scenes placed throughout the Commonwealth. Out of every arrangement of bones and objects that tells a quiet story about someone who died in the ruins, 47% include a teddy bear somewhere in the composition. They appear in adult hands and child arms and propped against walls and placed carefully beside the remains of people who clearly wanted something soft near them at the end. The teddy bear was used more than any other single object to stand in for loss, for the desire for comfort, for the human need to hold on to something warm when everything else is gone. It was chosen because it needed no explanation. Everyone already knows what it means. Nuka-Cola bottles in the Commonwealth are not placed at random. They cluster near chairs, near entertainment spaces, near the places where people would have sat down to rest or socialize. They're almost entirely absent from kitchens. Pre-war households in the Commonwealth kept their Nuka-Cola in the rooms where they relaxed, not in the rooms where they prepared food. This placement pattern holds consistently across thousands of bottles in hundreds of locations. It is either the result of careful individual placement or the result of a rule that was built into how objects were distributed across the wasteland. Either way, the bottles remember the social habits of the people who drank them, even though those people have been gone for over 2 centuries. Nuka World introduced 8 unique Nuka-Cola flavors, each one built around a different pre-war American identity. Nuka Wild was designed to look like a product sold at roadside stands in Western states, and its label uses the same kind of lettering seen on real 1950s Western film posters. Nuka Void was designed to look like a product aimed at people who loved science fiction pulp magazines from the same era. Each of the 8 flavors was given a fully developed label with its own visual language, its own color scheme, and its own reference to a specific kind of pre-war culture. Most of those labels are never examined closely enough to appreciate any of this. They were designed that way regardless. The holotape games found in the Commonwealth, small playable programs built into physical holotape casings, each carry a label that imitates the look of a real video game from a specific era. Atomic Command uses the bold, flat color style of early 1980s arcade game packaging. Grognak and the Ruby Ruins uses the painted illustration style of fantasy role-playing games from later in that same decade. Pitfall imitates the look of a specific early home console game, down to the font and the layout. Each label was designed in full detail. The detail is only visible to those who hold the tape in their hands and look at it carefully. The holotape records indicate this level of inspection is possible. Nothing else points toward it. The magazines scattered across the Commonwealth each carry a cover that is a careful imitation of a real publication type. Total Hack looks like an electronics hobbyist magazine from the 1960s. Grognak the Barbarian uses the visual style of pre-war comic books aimed at young readers. Live and Love imitates the cover design of women's lifestyle magazines from the same period. Each cover uses the correct typography for its era and the correct layout proportions. Those who have studied real publications from these categories have noted that the imitations are accurate enough to suggest that people who made them had direct access to original examples. In the wasteland, even the magazines were built from research. Books fill the shelves of the Commonwealth in large numbers. None of them can be opened. They exist as objects, not as readable texts, and most of them are treated as raw materials that can be broken down for other purposes. But the titles on their spines and covers are real words, and over 400 distinct titles have been recorded by those who catalogued what was placed on those shelves. Some titles are clear parodies. Some are real works from before the war. A few are titles that appear nowhere else in the world outside of those shelves. Entirely invented books that have no existence beyond the Commonwealth's ruins. 3 of those invented titles are mentioned in terminal entries as books that pre-war residents were reading. They are canonical books in the history of the wasteland that exist only on shelves no one can open. The terminal entries in the Commonwealth collectively contain around 200,000 words of written material, roughly the same as 2 full-length novels. Those records were gathered and organized by researchers who spent years working through every terminal in every location, and the database they produced remains the most complete record of the wasteland's written history. Inside that database, 12 entries, written in 12 different locations, have been identified as coming from the same hand. The writing style is consistent. A specific grammatical pattern appears in all 12. None of the terminals that carry these entries are connected to each other by any record, any event, or any name. The author wrote in 12 places and left no explanation for why those 12 places were chosen, or what, if anything, they were meant to mean together. The objects of the Commonwealth carry the fingerprints of everyone who ever touched them, and some of those fingerprints belong to people nobody ever wrote down. The Commonwealth keeps its secrets quietly. Some of them are buried in terminal entries that most people never find. Some of them are written into the shape of a room or the position of a skeleton at a desk. Some of them are signals broadcasting to coordinates that hold nothing. The wasteland does not explain everything it contains, and not all of its open questions were left open by accident. This chapter moves through the things that were never resolved, the mysteries that remain exactly as they were placed, waiting without answers, in the ruins of a world that had more questions than it ever had time to answer. A radio signal can be picked up near the glowing sea, the heavily irradiated region in the southwest of the Commonwealth. It repeats in a pattern that researchers have identified as Morse code. When the pattern is decoded, it translates into a set of coordinates within the Commonwealth's map. Those coordinates point to a specific location. That location contains nothing. There is no structure there. There is no named resident. There is no connection to any larger event or record. The signal has been broadcasting to an empty point on the map for an unknown period of time, directing anyone who finds and decodes it toward a place that holds no reward and offers no explanation. Whether the destination was removed at some point before the Commonwealth was opened to the outside world, or whether the signal was always meant to lead nowhere, is not recorded anywhere. The glowing sea contains a small settlement ruin that was not built by whoever is there when visitors arrive. The location is called the Crater of Atom. Worn paths run between its structures. The sleeping areas show signs of use. Fire pits hold ash that appears recent. The signs of habitation are clear. The Children of Atom, a religious group that reveres radiation as a holy force, are the most likely explanation for who was there, but no members of that group are present in that specific location within the main area of the glowing sea. Who built the settlement, who lived in it, and where they went is addressed by no record, no conversation, and no note found anywhere nearby. The place was lived in. The people who lived in it are simply gone. The Children of Atom, who do occupy the region, hold beliefs that do not fully agree with each other. Their religion centers on the bomb that created the glowing sea crater, which they regard as a direct expression of their deity's will. The texts that describe their theology, found at the Crater of Atom in holotapes and written records, were apparently produced by groups with different understandings of what their faith actually requires. 2 of the core texts found at the same location directly contradict each other on the most fundamental question in their belief system: whether Atom wants all life to end completely or only to be changed into something new. No member of the Children of Atom in the Commonwealth acknowledges this contradiction in any conversation. The 2 texts simply sit beside each other, saying opposite things, without resolution. Virgil was a scientist who worked for the Institute before exposing himself to the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, and fleeing to the glowing sea. The FEV was a modified version of the virus that had been used to create supermutants, a process that, in every documented case across the Wasteland's history, destroys the higher functions of the mind completely. Virgil kept his intelligence. He remained capable of complex thought, memory, and communication, despite undergoing a transformation that should have ended all of those things. No record in the Commonwealth explains how this happened. His own terminal entries show that he studied the question himself and could not find an answer. The virus did to him what it had never done to anyone else, and neither he nor anyone else could explain why. The same virus used to transform Virgil raises a question that the Institute's own records never address. The Institute created Gen 3 synths, synthetic people whose biology is identical to that of natural humans at every level of examination. The FEV affects human biology. A Gen 3 synth carries human biology. The logical extension of these two facts, that a Gen 3 synth exposed to the virus would transform the same way a human would, is never discussed in any terminal entry, any recorded conversation, or any document found within the Institute's halls. The question exists in the space between established facts. The Commonwealth's records simply do not go there. Whether a Gen 3 synth is a conscious being, whether it thinks, feels, and experiences the world in ways that matter morally, is the central question of the Commonwealth's largest conflict, and it is never answered. Each of the 4 major groups in the region holds a position on the question. None of those positions is shown to be correct by anything that happens in the Commonwealth's history. The records kept in the Institute's Advanced Systems Wing contain 2 separate entries that directly contradict each other on whether Gen 3 synths are conscious. Both entries were written by Institute researchers. Both entries remain in the records, unresolved, side by side. The Commonwealth built its most important conflict around a question it was not willing to answer. The sole survivor's life before the war left almost no physical evidence in the place where they lived. The house in Sanctuary Hills contains the objects of daily family life: furniture, food, children's toys. It does not contain anything that points to what the sole survivor did during the working hours of their pre-war existence. No professional materials are present, no identification documents, no records of employment or training. The house was designed to hold the evidence of a family, and nothing more specific than that. This was a deliberate choice, made to allow each person who steps into the sole survivor's life to bring their own sense of who that person was before the bombs fell. The absence is intentional. The blank space was placed there on purpose. Vault 111 contains a maintenance area that is accessible through a hatch in the lower level. This area is not connected to any larger event or record in the Commonwealth. The terminals inside it hold logs that run until 2091, 14 years after the Great War, and then stop without explanation. Someone was working in that maintenance area more than a decade after the bombs fell. The records of what they were doing end without warning and are never resumed. A skeleton sits at one of the desks in the area, wearing civilian clothes rather than a Vault-Tec uniform. There is a mug on the desk beside it. No record anywhere in the vault explains who this person was, what they were doing there, or why their records end where they do. The overseer of Vault 111, the Vault-Tec employee responsible for managing the non-cryogenic staff who ran the facility, died during an internal conflict among the staff in the early post-war years. Her body is in the Vault's security office. Her final terminal entry documents the conflict that killed her in measured professional language, maintaining a calm tone as she describes events that were clearly threatening her life. The entry ends in the middle of a sentence. The break was placed there deliberately. The original complete version of the sentence was written and then removed, replaced with the abrupt stop. The Vault's overseer did not finish her last thought. The record of her final moments was designed to end before it was done. After the Commonwealth's central conflict ends, certain places are described in the narration that follows each possible outcome. The consequences for named settlements are laid out, one by one. Covenant, the settlement built around a system of psychological testing and hidden control, is not mentioned in any of these accounts. Regardless of which outcome is reached, its fate after the resolution of the Commonwealth's major conflict is not addressed from any direction, by any narrator, under any circumstances. The settlement simply continues to exist in the records up to that point, and then disappears from the story without comment. The island of Far Harbor holds an ending that most people who visit it never find. The best possible outcome for the island, the one in which all 3 of its major groups survive and remain, requires a series of choices that are not clearly marked as leading toward it. Most people who spend time on the island reach an ending in which at least one group is gone. The full survival ending existed in the island's records for months before most people knew it was there. When its existence was confirmed, those who sought it out found that its closing narration contains a reference to something that will eventually happen to the island's fog. No record anywhere in the Commonwealth explains what that something is. The ending closes with a thread that goes nowhere, pointing toward a part of the story that was never written. The Commonwealth's mysteries were not accidents of development. They were spaces left open deliberately, places where the world admitted that it did not have every answer. The Wasteland found its way to a new kind of audience in April of 2024. The Fallout television series, produced for Amazon Prime Video, brought the Commonwealth's world, its vaults, its factions, its ruins, and its quiet philosophical weight to people who had never held a Pip-Boy or walked the broken streets of Boston. What made the series different from most adaptations of this kind was that the people who built the original world were involved in building the new one. The result was something that did not simply borrow from what existed. It extended it, added to it, and in some places answered questions that the games had always left open. This chapter moves through that series, from its first season to its second, and looks at what it built and how carefully it was made. The Fallout television series was the first live-action version of the franchise to be made, with the direct involvement of the studio that created it. The executive producer of the original game series took an active role in the production, giving the show's creative team access to materials that had never been made available publicly: internal lore records, design documents, unreleased concept work. This access changed what the series was allowed to be. It was not produced as a separate interpretation of the Fallout world, running parallel to the games and free to make its own rules. It was produced as a continuation of the same world, with the same history, held to the same standards. Everything that happens in the series is treated as part of the Wasteland's actual record. One of the most significant things established in Season 1 was the fate of Shady Sands, the city that grew from the small settlement seen in the original Fallout and became the capital of the NCR, or New California Republic, by the time of Fallout, New Vegas. The series revealed that Shady Sands had been destroyed. The timeline of that destruction was not stated directly. It was encoded in a background detail, a chalkboard visible in a classroom scene, showing a date that, when read against the Fallout universe's calendar, places the destruction roughly 15 years before the events of the show. The showrunners confirmed this reading after the season ended. The most important political development in the Wasteland's recent history was hidden on a classroom wall. The Pip-Boy worn by Lucy McLean in Season 1 was not a costume piece. It was a working electronic device, built to display a functioning version of the Pip-Boy interface on a real screen. The prop was heavy enough that the actors wearing it had to adjust how they moved their arms during early production, and a lighter version was created for scenes involving physical activity. The original heavy versions were shown at public events after the season was released and were later offered at auction to raise money for charity. The care that went into a single prop, a device that could have been made as a hollow shell, reflects the standard applied to the production as a whole. The vault at the center of Season 1's story, Vault 33, was built as a physical structure. The circular corridors, the working vault doors, the Vault-Tec signage showing the correct vault number. All of it was constructed on a physical stage over a period of 11 weeks. The materials used to build the walls were chosen to match the visual character of vault interiors as established in the games. The typography on the signs, the color values on the walls, and the placement of the vault number were all reviewed and approved before construction began. The set was not designed to look like a vault. It was designed to be one, within the limits of what physical production makes possible. The ghoul, one of Season 1's central figures, required hours of preparation before each day of filming. The prosthetic work applied to the actor playing the character went through 23 separate design versions before the final look was settled on. Earlier versions distributed the damage to the face more evenly. The final version concentrated more of the deterioration on one side, leaving the other side closer to how the character appeared before the war. This was a deliberate storytelling choice. The less damaged side of the face was kept readable, as the person Cooper Howard had been before ghoulification changed him. The physical damage was arranged to tell a story about what survived underneath it. Cooper Howard's pre-war life as an actor in Vault-Tec promotional material is revealed across Season 1 through a series of flashback sequences. The advertisements he appears in were produced as complete, self-contained short films, fully graded, fully scored, designed to look exactly like real television commercials from the 1950s. They were filmed by a separate production unit over several weeks, independently of the main season's shoot. 3 of those advertisements contained details in the background, text on documents, images on monitors, objects on props tables, that carry lore information not spoken about in any scene or conversation in the show. The advertisements were made to be studied. Most people watching them for the first time are not looking that closely. Season 2 moved the story to New Vegas, placing the show's characters in direct contact with one of the most detailed locations in the game series. The Lucky 38 Tower, the Ultra Luxe Casino, and the Vault-21 gift shop were all built as physical sets for the production. The Lucky 38's interior was designed in consultation with the art team that created the original game, using early concept work as a reference for areas of the building that the game had implied but never shown. The goal was to make the television version of the Lucky 38 feel like a place that had always existed in the same history as the game's version, not like a reinterpretation of it. Mr. House, the figure who controls New Vegas from within a life support chamber inside the Lucky 38, is played in Season 2 by an actor whose presence brought new weight to a character known previously only through text on a screen. The life support system surrounding him in the series is more elaborate than the one depicted in the game. Additional machinery and monitoring equipment were added to make the setup look credibly functional to viewers who had never encountered the character before. The core elements were held constant: the sealed chamber, the monitoring display, the complete physical separation from the rest of the world. What was added was built around what already existed, not in place of it. Caesar's Legion, the faction that controls territory to the east of New Vegas and that figures significantly into Season 2's conflict, appears in the series with a level of visual detail that goes beyond what the game provided. More than 200 individual costumes were made for Legion soldiers, each one assembled by hand from salvaged and repurposed materials. No 2 Legion soldiers in the background of any scene wear the same combination of equipment. This variation was a deliberate choice. A real force made up of people who had gathered their equipment from the wasteland would not look uniform. Each soldier's costume was built separately by a different member of the costume department, which is why each one is distinct. Norm MacLean's investigation into Vault-31, which began in Season 1 when he stayed behind while the rest of his vault moved into the wasteland, continues through Season 2 and reaches conclusions that reframe the entire history of the Vault program. Vault-31 was not designed to house a normal population. It was designed to preserve Vault-Tec's own senior leadership in cryogenic sleep, ready to emerge and reassert corporate control over the post-war world once conditions allowed. The executives are still there, frozen and waiting, surrounded by the objects of their pre-war professional lives. The showrunners described this image as the clearest expression of what the Fallout series has always been about: the people at the top of the old world, making sure they would still be at the top of the next one. Season 3 of the Fallout series is in production, with filming planned for 2026. The location has not been formally announced. The ending of Season 2 contains visual details, specific directional cues, and a final image oriented toward the east, that have been read by many as pointing toward the Commonwealth as the next setting. If the series moves to the Commonwealth, it will be the first time the show has been set in the same region as Fallout 4, and it will bring television audiences into direct contact with the Institute, the Railroad, the Minutemen, and the ruins of Boston. Several questions left open in the game's records would, in that case, have the opportunity to be addressed on screen for the first time. The television series did not simply adapt the Fallout world. It extended it, deepened it, and reminded the audience that the wasteland has always been a story about what people choose to build after everything falls apart. The wasteland was not always the way it appears in the Commonwealth. 210 years of decay, radiation, and slow forgetting turned the post-war world into something almost unrecognizable from what it had been in the first years after the bombs fell. To understand what the Commonwealth became, it helps to look at what the wasteland looked like when it was younger, when buildings still stood more or less intact, when survivors still remembered the names of the streets they had grown up on, and when the social memory of the old world had not yet faded into legend. Appalachia, the region of West Virginia explored in Fallout 76, offers exactly that kind of view. Its story takes place only 25 years after the Great War, in a wasteland still raw and unfinished, where the dust had barely settled and the world had not yet decided what it was going to become. Fallout 76 is set in the year 2102. The Great War ended in 2077, That gap of 25 years is short enough that survivors in Appalachia still remember the old world directly, not from stories or records, but from lived experience. They remember what food tasted like before it was irradiated. They remember what clean water looked like. They remember jobs and houses and the specific sounds of ordinary life in a country that no longer exists. The buildings around them are damaged, but not yet collapsed into the kind of deep ruin seen in the Commonwealth. Pre-war infrastructure still partially works in places. The world looks like something that was recently broken, rather than something that has been broken for a very long time. The difference between Appalachia in 2102 and the Commonwealth in 2287 is the difference between a fresh wound and an old scar. 185 years of additional silence, decay, and loss. Vault 76 was not designed to run an experiment on its residents. It was one of a small number of control vaults, facilities built to function as intended, housing people in reasonable conditions without hidden objectives or secret tests. The purpose of a control vault was to generate baseline data against which the results of the experimental vaults could be compared. Without a population living under normal vault conditions, the results from vaults running psychological tests or exposure studies or social manipulation experiments would have no meaningful reference point. The residents of Vault 76 were, in a technical sense, the control group for the suffering happening in vaults all around them. Terminal entries within the vault confirm that its residents knew other vaults were running experiments. They were never told what those experiments involved. They lived in relative comfort, while others were subjected to conditions designed to cause harm, and the data from their comfortable lives was used to measure exactly how much harm those conditions produced. The overseer of Vault 76 is never given a full name in any record found in Appalachia. She is referred to only by her title throughout the game's history. What she did leave behind was a personal journal, recorded across a series of holotapes scattered through the region. Those recordings reveal that she spent her time inside the vault, piecing together what was happening in the experimental vaults nearby. Using communications she intercepted through the vault's monitoring systems. By the time Reclamation Day arrived, the day Vault 76 was designed to open and release its residents into the wasteland, she had already decided what she intended to do with the knowledge she had gathered. Her final journal entry, recorded on that day, states that she was going to find the people who had survived the nearby experimental vaults and try to help them. Everything she does in the years that follow grows out of the guilt she carried on the day she walked out of a vault that had treated her well, knowing what had been done to others nearby. The responders were the first organized group to form in Appalachia after the war. They were built from the people who'd worked in emergency services before the bombs fell. Firefighters, paramedics, police officers, emergency medical technicians. These were people who had been trained to respond to disaster. And when the largest disaster in human history arrived, they did what their training told them to do. They organized. They established protocols. They adapted their pre-war procedures for a post-nuclear environment and began providing help to whoever needed it. Training manuals found in responder fire stations across Appalachia show the specific ways those adaptations were made. One manual contains a full section on radiation triage, the process of assessing and prioritizing radiation-injured survivors, written in the same clinical, step-by-step format used in pre-war emergency medical guides. The language is careful and professional. It was written by someone who had genuinely known how to save lives before the war and was trying to keep doing it after. The responders did not survive, but the records of how carefully they tried remain throughout Appalachia. What destroyed the responders was not simply the violence of the wasteland. It was a disease that had been created before the war ever started. The scorched plague, a central threat running through Fallout 76's story, is a biological weapon that was engineered in a Vault-Tec laboratory and stored at a facility called the White Spring in the mountains of Appalachia. The plague does not kill its hosts in the conventional sense. It transforms them. People and animals infected by the plague become the scorched, aggressive, fire-breathing creatures that attack anything living. The plague was not released by the nuclear bombs. It escaped from its containment at the White Spring before the war ended, in an accident that the facility's records document in detail. The Great War arrived in Appalachia on top of a biological catastrophe that was already in progress. The region was already losing people to the scorched plague on the morning the missiles fell. Vault 79 was built to hold something other than people. It was constructed to store the entire gold reserve of the United States government, a concentration of pre-war wealth so large that it was intended to serve as the financial foundation for a post-war national government. The plan assumed that some form of the United States government would survive the war, emerge in due course, reclaim the gold, and use it to rebuild a functioning economy. No such government emerged. The gold sat in Vault 79 for 77 years, sealed behind automated security systems still running on their original programming, guarding an asset that no longer had an owner. The largest single collection of pre-war wealth in the Eastern Wasteland was locked inside a vault designed by a country that had ceased to exist, waiting for an authority that was never going to come. The Mothman is one of the most unusual figures in Appalachian wasteland history. It's based on a genuine piece of American regional folklore, a creature said to have been seen near Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the late 1960s, in the period leading up to the collapse of a local bridge. Fallout 76 places its version of the Mothman near a bridge that corresponds to the real-world location of that original sighting. The creature in the game was initially documented only as a hostile presence. A second version was added later, the Wise Mothman, a variant that does not attack and instead produces effects that benefit those who encounter it. The addition was made in response to those who felt the original hostile-only version did not reflect the genuinely ambiguous nature of the legend it was based on. The Mothman in the real world was never clearly dangerous. The Appalachian version eventually learned to reflect that ambiguity. Vault City, first encountered in Fallout 2, was built by the survivors of Vault 8, one of the very few vaults in the entire franchise to receive a working GE or Garden of Eden creation kit. The GE key was designed as a complete ecological restoration device, capable of transforming a dead and irradiated landscape into one capable of supporting life and agriculture. Vault 8's residents used theirs as intended, and the result was Vault City, a genuinely functioning, self-sustaining community built on restored land. The success of Vault 8 is documented in records that extend across the Wasteland's history. Terminal entries in the Institute's Advanced Systems Wing in the Commonwealth show that the Institute studied the GECK and determined it was not useful for their underground environment. They chose not to pursue surface restoration using the technology that had allowed Vault City to exist. The Commonwealth surface remained broken and irradiated because the most technologically advanced organization in the region decided the surface was not worth restoring. The Brotherhood of Steel that appears in Fallout 76 is not the Brotherhood seen in later games. The Steel Dawn expansion, which introduces a Brotherhood chapter to Appalachia, shows the organization at an earlier and more idealistic point in its history. The Brotherhood's soldiers in Appalachia still believe that their purpose involves protecting people, not simply acquiring and controlling technology. They work alongside survivors. They share resources. They behave like a force built around genuine service rather than institutional power. The shift that turns the Brotherhood into the more rigid, technology-focused organization seen in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 is traced through in-game records to a series of leadership changes that followed a significant military defeat. The Brotherhood did not start as the faction it became. It was changed by loss, and by the people who took control after that loss, and decided that protecting knowledge mattered more than protecting people. The New California Republic began as a single small settlement. Shady Sands appears in the original Fallout game as a modest village in the California wasteland, a community of survivors trying to build something stable in the ruins of the old world. Over the next 2 centuries, it grew into a nation. By the time of Fallout, New Vegas, set more than 200 years after the first game, Shady Sands had become the capital of the NCR, a republic with a military, a legislature, trade agreements, territorial disputes, and all the bureaucratic weight of an established government. It had modeled itself consciously on the pre-war United States, adopting its democratic structure, its federal organization, and its expansionist approach to neighboring territories. The Fallout television series revealed that Shady Sands no longer exists by the time its story takes place. The city was destroyed. The republic built around it collapsed. The nation that had spent generations trying to rebuild the old world ended the same way the old world had ended, suddenly, without enough warning, to save what had been built. Caesar's Legion grew from the failure of the NCR's reach. Edward Sallow was an NCR citizen who had been educated in pre-war history before becoming a wasteland traveler and eventually a warlord. His academic background was serious. Records show he had studied the history of the ancient world in depth, with particular attention to the structures that had allowed large civilizations to hold together under pressure. After leading a campaign to unite a collection of tribal groups in the Mojave region, he used that study to build a new kind of organization. He named it after the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, as most of his followers assumed, because he believed the Republic's structure was more durable than what the NCR had attempted. His followers gave him the title of Caesar. He did not correct them. The distinction between Republic and Empire mattered to him, and to essentially no one else. His records, fragmentary but readable in the game's files, show that he genuinely believed his approach would produce something more stable than what had failed before. Whether he was right remains unanswered. The wasteland around New Vegas, at the time his legion is encountered, is still in the middle of the experiment. The earliest days of the post-war world were not a beginning. They were an ending that had not yet decided what it would become, and everything that followed was built on the choices made in that silence. The Fallout universe has been telling the same story for a long time. The settings change, the characters change, the specific details of each region, each conflict, and each faction shift from game to game. But beneath all of that, the same questions keep coming back. What do people do when everything is gone? What gets built in the space left behind? What survives? And what was never worth saving in the first place? These are not questions with clean answers, and the wasteland has never pretended otherwise. This chapter steps back from the specific details of the Commonwealth and looks at the larger shape of what the Fallout series has been doing across all of its games, the patterns that hold, the arguments it keeps making quietly, and what it has always believed about the people walking through its ruins. Every mainline Fallout game ends the same way, at its core, not with resolution, but with the edge of one. Fallout 1 ends with the Vault Dweller driving the Master's army from the wasteland and then being exiled from the Vault that sent them. The Master is gone. Shady Sands survives. The story stops there, before anyone can see what the survival becomes. Fallout 2 ends with the Enclave, a remnant of the pre-war government that had been trying to reclaim the world by destroying most of it. Defeated and scattered. The West Coast is left to rebuild. No one shows what the rebuilding looks like. Fallout 3 ends with clean water flowing into the Potomac River for the first time in 200 years, or with the process begun, or with it poisoned, depending on choices made in the final moments. The water starts moving. The game ends. Fallout 4 ends with one faction standing above the others in the Commonwealth, and the others diminished or destroyed. The power balance has shifted. What the new balance produces is left unshown. Every one of these endings is a door opening onto something that the games never step through. The series has always been more interested in the moment before things change than in the change itself. There are no clean wins in the wasteland. Every ending that could be described as good still carries significant loss inside it. Project Purity, the effort at the center of Fallout 3's story, was designed to purify the water supply of the capital wasteland, to give the region clean water for the first time since the Great War. If it works, it works. The water runs clean. But 200 years of radiation damage do not reverse themselves because the water is clean now. The people who drank irradiated water. Their entire lives are still irradiated. The mutations are still there. The damage done across generations does not undo itself. The best ending of Fallout. New Vegas stabilizes the Mojave region under the control of whoever the Courier chose to support. But the NCR is weakened, Caesar's legion is weakened, and Mr. House, if he survives, is diminished. There is no version of the Mojave's future that costs nothing. The Fallout 4 endings each require the destruction of something that cannot be rebuilt. Something is always lost. The series makes this consistent. Winning in the wasteland means choosing which losses you can live with, not avoiding loss altogether. Technology runs through the entire Fallout series as something that has never been neutral. Power armor, the most visible symbol of pre-war military strength, protects the person inside it completely and separates them from everything around them. It is both the safest thing in the wasteland and one of the most isolating. The GA-Seek, the Garden of Eden creation kit, a device designed to restore dead land to fertility, was produced in such small numbers that most of the wasteland never had access to one. The technology that could have healed the world was too rare to heal most of it. The Institute's synths represent the highest achievement in biological engineering in the Commonwealth's history, and they are also the source of more fear and mistrust than any other single development in the region. The FEV, or Forced Evolutionary Virus, has been used to create creatures of extraordinary physical capability and to destroy the minds of thousands of people who were exposed to it without consent. Every major technology in the series carries its cost built into it. The pre-war world believed that building better tools was the same as building a better world. The wasteland exists because that belief was wrong. The Vault program is where that belief is expressed most clearly. Each vault was designed as a controlled environment, a sealed space where specific conditions could be imposed and specific outcomes observed. Some vaults were given impossible social conditions. Some were given environmental ones. Some were given psychological ones. Vault 11 was designed so that residents had to sacrifice one of their own each year, or face automatic termination of the entire population. Vault 92 was designed to test the effects of white noise on aggression in musicians. Vault 81 was designed to expose its residents to experimental diseases without their knowledge. Vault 95 was designed to offer recovering addicts a clean environment and then deliberately introduce drugs back into it after 5 years. Across all of these experiments, Vault-Tec was asking a single question, framed differently each time. How much can a person endure before they stop being what they were? The data collected from the answer was preserved in records that have mostly never been used to help anyone. The experiments produced suffering and documentation. Documentation sat in sealed terminals while the suffering continued in the wasteland above. The wasteland is full of people who understand exactly how things went wrong and who cannot do anything useful with that understanding. The Brotherhood of Steel, across every game in the series, shows clear awareness that uncontrolled technology caused the Great War. Their response is to control technology by keeping it away from everyone who might misuse it, which in practice means keeping it away from everyone. The Institute's own records show that its researchers were aware, at multiple points, that the work they were doing raised serious moral questions about the nature of consciousness and the rights of the beings they were creating. They continued the work. Caesar built his legion on a detailed study of why large civilizations fail. And he built an organization that is already showing the same failure patterns he documented. The knowledge is real. The people who hold it are real. The gap between knowing what went wrong and acting differently because of it is where most of the wasteland's tragedy lives. The characters who move through the wasteland at the center of each game all share one specific quality. None of them are from the place they end up changing. The Vault Dweller leaves a sealed vault and walks into a world they have only read about. The Chosen One comes from a small tribal community in the California hills and travels into a wider wasteland they have never seen. The Lone Wanderer grows up inside Vault 101, a vault that had not opened in 19 years before they left it. The Courier is shot in the head and wakes up knowing almost nothing reliable about the world they are walking back into. The Sole Survivor comes from before the war entirely, separated from the present by 210 years of frozen sleep. All of them are outsiders, all of them change things, and all of them make those changes without having grown up under the weight of what those changes will cost the people who stay behind after the story ends. The series places its protagonist consistently in the position of someone with enough distance to see clearly and not quite enough connection to feel the full consequences of what they decide. The companions who travel alongside these protagonists carry what the protagonists cannot. Preston Garvey has watched the Minutemen collapse from the inside. He was there when they failed at Quincy. He carried the weight of being the last one standing. Nick Valentine has spent decades in Diamond City, watching what the fear of synths does to a community that cannot stop being afraid. Kate grew up in a part of the wasteland that offered no protection to people like her, and she carries every year of that experience in the way she moves through the world. Boone, in the Mojave, has a specific and personal accounting of what the NCR's wars have cost, not as a political position, but as something that happened to him in a particular town on a particular night. Each of these companions represents the kind of knowledge that cannot be gained from reading records or observing from a distance. It is the knowledge of having been there for all of it, with no way out and no outside perspective to make it feel smaller. The protagonist can understand this kind of knowledge. They cannot share it. The companions are the wasteland, explaining itself to someone who arrived too late to have grown up inside it. Memory in the Fallout series is never simply a record of what happened. It is a force. The sole survivors' memories of the pre-war world make them capable in ways that no one else in the Commonwealth can match. They remember what things were, and that memory gives them a framework for understanding what things could be again. Those same memories are also the source of the most destructive possible motivation. Grief for a world that is completely gone, for a spouse who cannot be brought back, or for a child who has become something unrecognizable. The memories are useful and dangerous at the same time. Nick Valentine carries memories that were never his in a biological sense. experiences recorded from a real person and placed into a machine that never lived them directly. The authenticity of what Nick feels about Jenny Henderson is real, even though the body feeling it was built rather than born. The lone wanderer's entire journey in Fallout 3 is shaped by the memory of a father who left, and the need to understand why. Memory in the wasteland is the thing that keeps people moving, and the thing that keeps some of them from ever being able to stop. The music is always playing. Every Fallout game puts pre-war recordings on post-war radio stations, and those recordings play through the entire journey across each region of the wasteland. The songs were written for a world of drive-in restaurants and suburban lawns, and the specific kind of optimism that comes from believing the future is going to be comfortable. They play over ruins. They play over bodies. They play over settlements where people are doing hard and uncertain work to stay alive one more season. The music does not acknowledge any of this. It was not written to. It simply continues, in the same cheerful or melancholy or romantic register it was always in, completely indifferent to what it is playing over. This is not an accident of design. It is one of the most consistent and deliberate emotional choices the series makes. The dissonance between the sound and the setting produces a specific feeling that no other technique in the games creates, a kind of tenderness for the old world combined with a clear-eyed understanding of what that world actually produced. The people who built the Fallout series described their central design intention in consistent terms across many years of interviews and commentary. They wanted to build a world where choices felt real, where the freedom to act in any direction was matched by the reality of consequences that followed from that action. Most stories that offer this kind of open choice protect the player from the full weight of what they decide. The consequences are personalized, aimed at the protagonist, contained within the story's frame. Fallout's consequences land on the people around the protagonist, on the settlements that were not defended, on the factions that were weakened when the story ended, on the individuals whose lives are changed by decisions made for reasons that had nothing to do with them. The series has always been honest about this. The freedom is real. The damage is real. The two things come together, and the player is left with both. The wasteland is not a punishment. That is perhaps the most important thing the series has always been saying, quietly, underneath everything else. It is not a warning about what humanity deserves. It is not a portrait of inevitable collapse. It is a place where people are still trying. They build settlements in baseball stadiums and old churches and abandoned factories. They run newspapers and schools and taverns. They form governments and religions and musical traditions. They fall in love and have children and argue about politics and tell stories about the old world to people who were born after it ended. The grand structures of the pre-war civilization, its nations, its corporations, its military apparatus, all of those fell and did not come back. But the smaller thing, the instinct that makes a person want to build a safe place for the person standing next to them, did not fall. It was never dependent on the large structures. It existed before them and it continued after them. Every settlement in the wasteland is evidence of it. Every companion who chose to keep walking with someone they trusted is evidence of it. The series has been making this argument since the first game, and it has not changed its mind. What the Fallout universe has always been asking is not what happens when everything falls apart. It asks, what do you do next? And it has always believed, quietly, that there is an answer worth finding. As this journey draws toward its quiet end, there is one more part of the Commonwealth worth visiting. Not the factions or the creatures or the hidden systems running beneath the surface, not the mysteries or the unanswered questions or the weight of 200 years of history. This final part of the journey moves towards something smaller and softer than any of that. It moves toward the places in the Commonwealth that exist simply to be peaceful. The corners of the wasteland where nothing is being tested, nothing is being fought over, and nothing is being built or destroyed. The places that were put there not because they serve a purpose, but because the world felt more complete with them in it. The Commonwealth has always carried these quiet spaces alongside everything else it contains. This chapter is about those spaces and about what it means that they are there at all. There are locations in the Commonwealth that have no enemies in them, no named residents, no markers pointing toward them, no records connecting them to any larger event in the wasteland's history. A small fishing dock sits on the Charles River, its wooden planks worn smooth, its lines still hanging over the water as if someone might return to use them. A rooftop garden in downtown Boston holds planters that still contain soil, actual soil, placed there and maintained through the environmental design of the space, sitting in containers above a city that has been broken for 2 centuries. A park bench overlooks the glowing sea from a distance safe enough to sit and look, positioned so that the view across the irradiated expanse is framed by the landscape around it. None of these locations were built to advance anything. They were built because the people designing the Commonwealth kept adding places that felt worth visiting for their own sake. They filled the map not just with conflict and discovery, but with places that simply exist, quietly, waiting for anyone who happens to find them and decides to stop moving for a moment. In the wasteland, the presence of a place with nothing to do in it is its own kind of statement about what the world is worth. The dogs of the Commonwealth are, in most circumstances, hostile. The wild mongrels that roam the wasteland attack without hesitation, and most people who encounter them do so in the context of a fight. But there is a behavior that these dogs exhibit that most people never witness, because it requires patience and the absence of any threatening action. In certain interior locations, collapsed buildings, ruined storefronts, abandoned shelters, wild mongrels can be found simply resting. They sit quietly, their heads lowered, their bodies still. They do not attack. They do not move toward anything. They simply rest, as dogs do, in whatever shelter they have found. This state lasts for roughly 2 in-game hours before the animal resumes its normal patterns. It was confirmed as a deliberate part of the creature's behavior, a rest cycle built into the dog's design alongside all of its combat behaviors. The dog that will attack without warning in one context can be found sitting quietly in a broken building, breathing slowly, unbothered by the world around it. The wasteland, in that moment, looks a little like somewhere animals can still just be animals. The fireflies that appear at night near the Commonwealth's water sources and forested areas are not a decorative effect applied uniformly across those environments. Each individual firefly in any given location follows its own path. The route it takes through the air is its own. The timing of its light is its own. No 2 fireflies in the same space flash at exactly the same moment or trace exactly the same pattern through the dark. The system that produces this was designed so that each instance of the creature operates independently, calculating its own movement and its own light within the boundaries of the area it inhabits. Most people who walk through the Commonwealth at night and see fireflies experience them as a single soft impression. The feeling of fireflies rather than any awareness of the individual lights. The calculation happening beneath that impression, the separate paths and separate timings all running at once, is invisible to anyone simply walking through. The beauty of the effect depends entirely on a level of detail that no one is meant to notice directly. It is there only so that the feeling it produces can be real. The night sky above the Commonwealth is built on real data. The star field visible on clear nights was generated using astronomical software that calculates the correct positions of stars as seen from the latitude of Boston, Massachusetts in the Northern Hemisphere. The constellations visible from that location are placed correctly. The Milky Way, visible as a band of light across the sky on the clearest nights, follows the orientation it actually holds when seen from New England. The positions were calculated and imported into the sky system rather than being placed by hand or approximated. The result is a sky that is more accurately rendered than the sky most people living in real cities ever see, because light pollution removes much of what the Commonwealth sky displays. Standing still in the Commonwealth on a clear night and looking up produces a view of the stars that is, in a technical sense, more honest about how the night sky actually looks than what most people in the real world have access to from where they live. The bombs took almost everything from the Commonwealth. They also removed the light pollution that had been hiding the stars for 100 years. The sounds that play in the Commonwealth during nighttime hours in locations near water were recorded at a specific place for a specific reason. A cricket track is part of the standard nighttime audio in water-adjacent areas, and that track was recorded in rural Massachusetts, near a freshwater source. The choice of recording location was made because the acoustic character of crickets varies depending on what surrounds them. The density of vegetation, the proximity of water, the specific temperature and humidity of the air. Crickets near still fresh water in New England produce a sound that is different from crickets recorded anywhere else, and that specific sound was the one chosen for the Commonwealth's nights. Embedded within that recording, at a volume level that sits below the primary track, is the sound of a frog calling once. One call, then silence. The frog is not part of any designed audio sequence. It was present during the recording, and its sound was kept in the final track rather than edited out. It plays in the background of every nighttime moment near water in the Commonwealth. Most people will never hear it. It plays anyway, once, somewhere beneath the crickets, a small sound from a real place, recorded on a real night, and carried into a world that ended 200 years ago. The Brahmin of the Commonwealth, the two-headed cattle that serve as the primary livestock animal of the post-war world, rest at night. During the night cycle, a Brahmin will lower both of its heads and close its eyes. The resting animation runs for approximately 4 in-game hours before the animal wakes and resumes its daytime behaviors. This animation was not present in earlier depictions of Brahmin in the wasteland. It was added to Fallout 4 as part of a broader effort to make the animals in the Commonwealth feel as though they inhabit the world, rather than simply stand in it as set dressing. The Brahmin sleeps because an animal that never slept would feel wrong, even if most people would never consciously identify what was wrong about it. There is a specific interaction available to anyone who finds a resting Brahmin and remains near it for the full duration of its sleep cycle, by sitting in a nearby chair or on a nearby bench and simply waiting. If this is done, the game registers the complete sleep cycle, and the Brahmin wakes as the sun rises. The world acknowledges that someone stayed. It marks the moment quietly and then moves on. The internal clock of the Commonwealth runs without stopping. It tracks hours and days and the slow movement of seasons across the region's landscape. The moment the sole survivor steps out of Vault 111 is recorded on a specific date that is the same in every playthrough, a fixed point in the Commonwealth's calendar from which all subsequent time is measured. Every hour spent in the wasteland after that moment advances the clock. The weather follows its cycles. The light moves across the sky. The merchants open and close on their schedules. Days accumulate. Those who have spent extended periods in the Commonwealth without completing its central story have documented playthroughs that stretched across more than 1,000 in-game days. Nearly 3 years of internal time, experienced as days and nights cycling through the wasteland's landscape, while the larger story waited. The Commonwealth does not require anything to be resolved in order to keep running. It simply continues, day after day, season after season, whether or not the central question of its history is ever answered. The Old North Church in Boston was built in the year 1723. It predates the pre-war period by more than 200 years, which makes it one of the oldest surviving structures in the Commonwealth's map, a building that was already ancient by the time the world it stood in was destroyed. Its bell tower rises above the surrounding ruins and, from the right vantage point, offers a view of the Commonwealth cityscape that is not available from ground level. The bell in the tower is intact. It hangs in the correct position. It has the correct shape and the correct physical presence within the space it occupies. In the audio records associated with the church, a bell toll sound exists, recorded, processed, and attached to the model in the data. It was prepared for use and then never used. The bell was made ready to ring. The sound was recorded. The connection between the sound and any moment in the game's experience was never made. The bell hangs there, complete and silent, holding a sound that belongs to it and that it has never been allowed to produce. In the wasteland, some things were made ready for a moment that simply never came. The house in Sanctuary Hills, where the sole survivor lived before the war, has a mailbox at the end of the front path. It sits at the edge of the property, at the point where the private space of the yard meets the street. It is the kind of object that belongs in front of a house, so ordinary that it would feel strange by its absence. The mailbox cannot be opened. There is no interaction available for it. Nothing inside it can be found or collected. No conversation in the game references it. No record mentions it. It is simply a mailbox, standing at the end of a path in front of a house, doing nothing that a mailbox can do in the wasteland because there is no mail and no one to deliver it. Whether it was placed as the remains of a planned mechanic that did not survive into the final Commonwealth, or whether it was placed because a house without a mailbox would feel incomplete in a way that is difficult to explain, is not recorded anywhere. Both explanations are plausible. Neither changes what the mailbox is. It is an ordinary object standing in front of an ordinary house, present because ordinary things were part of what this place used to be, and because removing them entirely would have made the house feel like a stage set rather than somewhere a family actually lived. The mailbox is not meaningful because of what it contains. It is meaningful because it is exactly the kind of small thing that exists in a real life, and its presence makes the life that was lived here feel real. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, at this moment, the fireflies are moving across the Charles River in patterns that no one is watching. Each one is following its own path through the dark, flashing at its own interval, independent of every other light moving near it. The Brahmin in the settlements are breathing slowly, their heads lowered, their eyes closed, resting through the last hours before sunrise. The night sky above the ruins of Boston is showing the correct position of Orion for this season. The 3 stars of the belt in their proper alignment, the surrounding stars in their correct places, the whole constellation sitting exactly where it would sit above the real city if the real city were dark enough to see it clearly. The cricket track is playing in every location near water. The familiar sound of a Massachusetts night carried into the wasteland from a real recording made on a real evening beside a real river. And somewhere in that recording, at the very bottom of the audio, below everything else, a frog calls once. It does not call again. The sound disappears back into the crickets and the dark and the slow rhythm of the night. The Commonwealth continues around it. The Brahmin breathe. The fireflies move. The stars hold their positions. The clock advances, hour by hour, through a night that is the same as every other night, in a world that keeps going, whether or not anyone is present to see it going. The wasteland does not require witness to continue. It does not require resolution or completion, or the presence of anyone moving through it with a purpose. It simply runs as it has always run, through its days and its nights and its slow, quiet seasons, full of small things that are still doing what small things do. Not because they were told to, and not because anyone is watching, but because that is what it means to be part of a world that has not stopped. This has been a long journey through the Commonwealth, through the pre-war corporations and the people who built them, through the factions and the settlers and the companions and the hidden systems running quietly beneath everything visible, through the creatures that were never supposed to exist and the sounds that were never supposed to be noticed, through the mysteries that were left open and the questions that were never meant to be answered, through the television series that extended the wasteland into a new kind of story, and through the earlier games that showed what the wasteland looked like before the dust had time to fully settle, and through the larger questions that all of it has always been asking, quietly underneath everything else, about what survives and what's worth building, and what people do when everything is gone and the silence is very long and the world is still there, waiting. The Commonwealth is not a simple place. It was never meant to be. It was built by people who believed that the details mattered even when no one would notice them, that the bell should be prepared even if it never rang, that the mailbox should stand at the end of the path even if no letter would ever arrive, that the frog's single call should be kept in the recording, even if no one would ever consciously hear it. The care that went into the small things is the same care that went into everything else. It is the same instinct that builds a settlement in the ruins of a baseball stadium and calls it a city. It is the same instinct that keeps a robot cleaning a house for 200 years because the family might still come home. The wasteland is full of this kind of care. It always has been. It is the most honest thing the Commonwealth has to say about what people are like when everything else has been taken away from them. The Commonwealth does not need you to stay awake to keep running. It will be here when you return, exactly as you left it, waiting in the dark with its fireflies and its stars and its slow, unbroken sense of time. And with that, the wasteland grows quiet once more.